Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to Young Professional Piang International Virtual Event 2021, Day 2, also its final day. I'm your first moderator for today, Jack from Young Professional Malaysia, also your current Asia Pacific Vice Chair alternate. I hope everyone is ready for some exciting and interesting presentations today. In total, we will have 6 presentations by 7 speakers. And before we head into the presentations, please allow me to briefly introduce Piang and Young Professional Commission, especially to our non-member audience. So Piang, in a nutshell, is a global organization that provides guidance and technical advice for sustainable waterborne transport infrastructure for ports and waterways. You may have heard of our working groups and their world-class publications, and it is our continuous mission to contribute towards the industry development. Young Professional Commissions, on the other hand, is dedicated to people below the age of 40. We were formed back in 2006 to promote the career development of the YPs locally, nationally, and globally. Our mission really is to encourage knowledge exchange and networking through some of our signature regional and international events. I will not talk too much about the Young Professional Commission or YPCom because I will leave that to our chair, Ashley, to talk further. Now, prior to the pandemic, the YP has been very active in organizing and attending events all over the world, such as our signature biannual BTV events. Now, while we are waiting for the international borders to fully reopen, the YP has taken its initiative to organize this international virtual event, the first of its kind. Our goal is simply to further connect and maintain the relationship built all over the globe. So before we head into the serious stuff, let us have a welcome remark from our YPCom chair, Ashley. Let me give you a bit of introduction about her. So she is from the Netherlands. She has lived in the UK for the past 4 years. She's currently living in Switzerland. She is a civil engineer, passionate about climate change, sustainability, and logistics. And in her spare time, she loves skiing, hiking, and triathlon. Wise choice, Ashley, moving to Switzerland. So to kickstart Day 2, let us invite our chair, Ashley, to give us a welcome remark. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jack, for this kind introduction. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone around the globe. I am very pleased and grateful to be here today and to be able to share some welcoming words with you before we kickstart the second day of this international virtual event. So today I would like to tell you a little story about how we all got here today. Jack already mentioned the YPCom has been in existence since 2006, and I would like to tell you the short history of Piang's Young Professional Commission. So before we dive into the detail of the YPCom history, let's start with the history of Piang itself. In 1885, in Brussels, the Inland Navigation Congress was held, followed by an Ocean Navigation Congress a few years later. And these two organizations merged into the International Navigation Congress. Their congress, organized in Paris in 1900, they formally established as the Permanent International Association of the Navigation Congresses. And since then, Piang has changed and grew significantly over the past century. Association organizing congresses every 4 years, to an association setting technical standards, publishing high-ranking reports, and organizing events on international, regional, and national levels. If you are interested in reading more about the history of Piang, I would recommend having a look at the Piang website, because there's a super interesting Piang history book available online. Because then for today, I will start focusing just on the young professionals. 20 years ago, this year, in 2001, members of the Environmental Commission had a discussion around some of the concerns. They had some concerns about things like the average age of their members in PIANC, because this was actually quite high. They also identified a generation gap in some national sections. And they found more and more that it was proving difficult to convince managers in companies of the value of PIANC and its membership. This combined with the realization that the young professionals of today are actually the managers, the experts, and the members of the future, they wanted to do something about this. So they raised these issues with ExCom. And in 2002, a task group of young professionals was established. So that task group met for the first time in 2003 with 10 members from various countries. And this task group developed a plan of how to improve the involvement of young professionals within PIANC. And they presented their findings at PIANC's annual General Assembly in 2003. So following their recommendations, a young professional implementation group was formed. And this group was tasked with the creation of an action plan, including topics as e-communication, YP presentation in working groups, technical commissions, and national sections, the promotion of PIANC amongst young professionals, for example, also through the De Pape Willems Award, an award especially for young professionals, and the connection with universities to improve knowledge transfer. So this young professional implementation group met for the first time in 2004. And after that first meeting, they started meeting twice a year. They met once a year in Brussels and once a year in cities as London, Lisbon, Madrid, and Estoril. They focused on the establishment of a website, the increasing the involvement of YPs within PIANC, and the formation of national young professional groups. And a key element of the success of this group was their connection with the ExCom and senior members through PIANC's vice presidents and mentors, who continuously promoted and encouraged the YP idea. So following the efforts of the YP implementation group, national YP groups were formed in different countries, following the example of Belgium, Spain, and the Netherlands, who started very early with their YP groups. This table here shows an overview of the first YP groups that were in formation during the time of the Young Professional Implementation Group. And they were formed thanks to their efforts, as well as YPs worldwide. Then, at the PIANC Congress in Estoril, Portugal, in 2006, the Young Professional Implementation Group shared their findings with the wider public of PIANC. And at this Congress, specific young professional events were organized, such as a YP social event, a YP session, and a YP award. One of the key conclusions that was presented at this Congress was that the young professionals are super important for the continuity of PIANC, and a permanent commission would be required to continue to promote and identify the needs of young professionals. So the implementation group submitted a proposal which was approved, and this was then the start of the YP commission as a permanent commission within PIANC. And the YP-Com was a fact from 2006, and it was immediately established, and the inaugural meeting, so the first YP-Com meeting, was held in Palermo in Italy, and attended by its first 15 members from 11 different countries. The main objective of that first meeting was to establish a plan for the first few years, as well as identifying a structure for the Commission. And it has had a structure that we still use today, where during that meeting they appointed a YPCOM chair, a YPCOM co-chair, and a YPCOM secretary. Moving on to the 15 years of the YPCOM that we arrived at this year. So there is not enough time to take you through each and every one of these years, but I just wanted to summarize that from those initial 15 members, we have currently grown to a group of 78 active YPCOM delegates and observers that attend our meetings regularly and our events. And these 78 people represent over 30 countries worldwide. We also have an audience of over 3,000 members on our LinkedIn group. And during those years, the YPs are now actively participating in working groups, congresses, seminars, national sections, and have plenty more YP groups than what we have seen before. With this growth, we developed the Commission from the chair and secretary structure into a strong team, which is a 10-person counting YPCOM board with a chair, co-chair, secretary, but also regional vice chairs and alternates to support us and grow the YPCOM family. Last but not least, the YPs also organize their own events, such as the one we have today, but also in normal times, in-person site visits, webinars, seminars, social events, and our signature event, the biannual technical visit. And this biannual technical visit deserves some special mention because it is truly an amazing YP event. It's our signature event and it happens every 2 years. And it has been there since the very beginning of the YP. Unfortunately, we had to miss out on the BTV this year. But the list of BTVs is impressive. And I am very pleased to share with you that the next BTV is already in the making. And we are planning for the next BTV to take place in March 2023 in Fort Lauderdale in the USA. So although we don't have a BTV this year, I am super proud of the International Virtual Event Organizing Committee who have pulled off this amazing 2-day event with attendees and presenters from all over the world. So big thank you to Sebastian, Bianca, Heather, Rossio, and Jack for organizing this for us. And a big thanks to all of our speakers. Yesterday we had a great lineup with speakers from Argentina, Brazil, and the US. And I'm very, very glad that you've joined us today to listen to our speakers from the Europe and Asia Pacific region. And then lastly, just thanks to all of you. Thank you for attending. And I hope to meet again soon and to see you later during the networking sessions. Enjoy today. Thank you. And back to Jack.
Thank you, Ashley, for the nice overview of Piang YPCOM history. And personally speaking, I too cannot wait for our next BTV event in 2023. But now, let us sit back, relax, and enjoy today's virtual presentations. Our first speaker for today is from YP, Piang, Australia, Mr. David Purdy, currently working at Royal Haskoning, DHV. So a little bit of background on David. David is a maritime structural engineer with over 13 years of design experience, including planning and design of marine infrastructures in Europe, the Middle East, and Asia Pacific. And his design experience includes design of boat harbor, marine terminal, and shipyard structures. His key projects include Ras Laffan Shipyard in Qatar, pardon my horrible pronunciation, Jurong Shipyard in Singapore, Ruwais Refinery expansion in UAE, Caltex Jetty upgrade, and Garden Island infrastructure recovery project in Australia. And ever since 2018, David has been gradually more involved in infrastructure projects within the Pacific region before taking up a new role last year, which is entirely focused on supporting the maritime infrastructures and projects within the Pacific, at the same time developing ongoing relationship with the international financial institutions. And his involvement within the region ranges from key port projects and to smaller outer island facilities. David is currently the lead for the Nuku'alofa Port Upgrade Project, sorry if I pronounced it wrongly, the Tonga Maritime Transport Sector Master Plan, and the Tuvalu Outer Island Maritime Infrastructure Project. His presentation topic for us today is Sustainability Challenges in the Development of Port Infrastructures in the Pacific region. And before I invite David, I just want to remind all the participants in the audience that you will have the privilege to ask questions, and you can do so by asking the questions through the small little interactivity button on your right screen. If you click on that, there's a Slido app. You can ask your questions, and after the presentations, I will bring these questions to David's attention. All right, David, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks very much, Jack, for the introduction. That's very nice. I'm David Perby, and today I'm going to talk to you about sustainable challenges in development of port infrastructure in the Pacific region. Presentation will cover the topic first of brief introduction about myself, talking about Pacific Island to provide some background, the role of the maritime sector, maritime infrastructure we can find in Pacific, sustainability, which is a big topic, challenges to achieve sustainability, and finally, 2 case studies based on projects I recently delivered in Pacific to illustrate a bit all this. And at the end, we'll finish with a Q&A session. A bit about myself. I'm French national, as you might notice by my accent, but I got as well Australian citizenship. I work in UK in the past, in shipyards, Baslafan, in Qatar. And since I moved to Australia in New South Wales, I mostly work on upgrades and remediation projects. I've seen take a lead role on maritime projects within Ralasconing, my current employer. And this region means a lot to me because I grew up in French Polynesia in Tahiti. My future involvement in Piang will be related to the working group 2400 ports in small island countries, which include the Pacific Islands. Pacific Islands is a very big place with very little population, as you can see on the top statement. About 0.1% of the world population spread over 15% of the Earth's surface. And to make things a bit more difficult or challenging, most of this area is covered in water. It's called the Blue Continent for a very good reason. If you look to the bottom corner of my slide, you can see there is a picture of Google Earth, and I put a red shape where most of the island are covered. And within this area, you have to imagine that only 3 million people live there. They got all different backgrounds. About 3 main cultural groups can be found: Micronesia, Melanesia, and Polynesia. But my presentation really will focus now on what we call the Pacific Island countries, the PICs. There are 14 independent countries, about 640 inhabited islands, and over 1,000 languages. So that's the countries you can see right at the top on the middle. All those countries are very fragile in the sense that they represent some of the smallest states in the world. Most of those countries are very, very vulnerable to climate change and natural disaster. They are geographically remote and isolated. They got a small population spread across large expanse of sea. The nation got limited resources and are very vulnerable to climate, to external financial shock, such as COVID. They are fragile and precious environments. There is insufficient infrastructure, uneven pattern of development, and weak governance because overall they are quite recent nations. But one thing is very common through all those nations. They got a very strong sense of community. And that's really remarkable. When there is a disaster, you can see how they gather together to overcome challenges. One other key particularity of this region is the reliance on external support. Those economy depend on AIDS money for investment in infrastructure, but more recently to support their own budgets because of the COVID again. Public sector is one of the main drivers of the economy, with most of the government depending on those grants money to help them carry on. There's limited private investment to create jobs, which increase this dependence of government, but as well as external support, to the external support. So you got a bit of a spiral here. I put on this slide the total commitment in 2020 for the whole region in terms of aid money. So that's about 2 billion, spread about 5,000 projects. So that's quite a lot of money when you consider there's only 3 million people living there. If you look right at the bottom, I put some picture to describe a bit the life on the island, or the trade, if you like. Most of the trade, international trade, is purely import. They mostly export empty containers, hence my pictures. Generally, those countries are split in two types of islands. You got the main capital island, and you got the outer islands. And the outer islands are very remote and really rely on fishing and farming to survive, as well as remittance from foreign nationals. Some family could live abroad. The role of the maritime sector in Pacific is key, where we see motorways as a key way of communication in Europe, in Australia. For them, is the waterways. International exchange rely onto international port to keep the country functioning. The internal link between community is through the maritime sector, and there is a duty as well to this sector to provide health and education. It's a bit of a social role to it. Mostly the challenges on the maritime sector in Pacific are to remain affordable, because we're looking at small cargo and amount of passenger to travel across large expanse of sea, to provide safe services on some of the most exposed locations on the world. Pacific Ocean is very renowned to be a fierce part of the world. To provide as well some efficient service, despite the fact that there is very limited funding and private investment. On this slide, I just try to highlight a bit the network, how it works, if you like, between international routes, domestic routes. That's, I think, the best way to showcase this maritime sector in Pacific, how important it is. So you can see on the left-hand side, the international routes connecting the Asia, Australia, and US. I show only here the route going through the Pacific countries. You can see right in the middle, in little red circle, that's the country of Vanuatu. We got 2 international ports, okay? And if you go to the right, I actually zoom into the country. So that's about 14 islands, and it's only 250,000 people living through that. And you can see the web, the domestic route, how sophisticated it is. Everything comes from the 2 international ports, the blue dots, and then it gets scattered across the island through some bigger green dots and some very, very small red dots. Green dots are what we call the domestic port. They are quite limited, despite the fact that there's 14 islands. Now, to help those routes, the sector, there is really 4 types of infrastructure you can find in Pacific. So the top one, the international ports, the one where all the cargo arrive, and generally it's mostly containers. They arrive, quite big infrastructure, as you can see, significant yard. Also cargo get break down into small packages, will get transported across to the other island via domestic port and LCT barges, as you can see on the bottom left corner. The infrastructure are a lot more modest. Basically, we're talking about concrete ramp to be able to drop a roll-on, roll-off vessel ramp. That's very privileged outer island got that. Most of the island, they got what we call community jetties, and you can see this is very small, and yet this is a daily life rely on that. The picture I put there is about people going to work using a 10-meter boat in a very small jetty, as you can see. But actually, those people are lucky, because quite often there's absolutely nothing, and that's the picture I show right on the top, top left corner. What I call landings, because there is nothing. It's basically just the ship landing directly onto the beach. Generally, it's because there's a lack of investment, or simply because the previous jetty get completely wiped away by a cyclone. Nevertheless, their landing sites are very important because they allow disaster relief, or when there is a bit of crop, because they rely on farming, to be able to transfer that to the next island to get a bit of cash out of this. Now we're going to play you a couple of videos about the two type of two projects have been involved actually. The first one is about Nuku'alofa, the International Port of Nuku'alofa, which is funded by ADB. You'll see that's a pretty nice video, which we are going to play now. So, please.
The Kingdom of Tonga, situated in the southern Pacific Ocean, is an archipelago of 177 islands set across an expanse of 700,000 square kilometers of ocean. The population of 108,000 has a strong seafaring tradition, and current and future trade plans rely heavily on sea trade to develop the economy. Currently, the Kingdom's economy is based on a large non-monetary sector, remittances from foreign-based nationals, fishing and agricultural exports. Tonga's development plans emphasize a growing private sector, upgrading agricultural productivity, developing tourism and improving communications and transport. Substantial progress has been made, but much work remains to be done. The current port container terminal at Queen Salote International Wharf is the lifeline of the remote island country of Tonga and has been identified as a bottleneck to future development.
Queen Salote Wharf is the capital international port for Tonga.
This is the only gateway, for this island. We only have one international wharf. Currently, when the ship are arriving at the ports, the berthing is too short. We need a longer berth for the container ship coming to Tonga.
Knowing that there will be larger ships operating in the Pacific Islands in the future, the Queen Salote International Port needs to be improved and upgraded to be able to accommodate those ships in the future.
With widespread degradation of the wharf facilities, a decaying concrete structure, insufficient lighting and substandard safety and hard stand provisions, the Asian Development Bank is working with the Government of Tonga for the provision of grant funding for the redesign and construction of an upgraded container port facility. Additionally, natural hazards such as cyclones, earthquakes and tsunamis pose a significant threat to the port container terminal and the achievement of national and regional development goals. The target of this upgrade is not only to modernize the facility, but as well to climate-proof the port in order to become an international gateway, promoting the economic development of Tonga. The upgrade of the port is proposed to start construction in 2021, with activities expected to be ongoing for 2 to 4 years. The main features of the project include the extension of Wharf 2 to better accommodate larger vessels, construction of a new dolphin between Wharf 1 and 2, construction of new dolphins on the eastern side of Wharf 1, reconstruction of the Wharf 1 reinforced concrete slab, yard improvements and smart and green port features such as reorganization, new paving, drainage, smart lighting, waste management and firefighting. Capacity building programs related to port operations, safety, operation and maintenance, and gender equity policy and training for the Ports Authority.
The hope for the Queen Salote International Wharf project is that it will improve provisions of better facilities for trade, and then it will increase the economy contribution from the transport sector, as well as provide sustainability of development here in Tonga.
After this project, if we will get more ships coming and we have more transshipment containers, we have more spaces for empty containers. Hopefully, we will get more additional revenue, for my country, stimulating our economy of my islands.
Hi. Now I'm going to show you a second video, much shorter this time. Still very nice music, you'll see. about the Outer Island project for Tuvalu. Now, this is quite different settings. That's Outer Island of Nui, about 200 kilometers from the main island of Funafuti. So you will see the difference in scale. We're going to play you the second video now, please. Welcome back. Now on the next slide, we're going to talk about sustainability. Sustainability is a very vast topic. There's very many different ways to define it. But on the case of infrastructure in Pacific, I really selected that sentence. For me, is the degree to which a facility is planned, constructed, operated to ensure economic, social, and environmental continuity over its entire life cycle. Sustainability is really different in Pacific to what we will experience in developed countries. For them, it is really a necessity. They are so exposed to disaster. They live in pristine environment on which they depend on for living. And they are overall very fragile nation in terms of economy. So it's a way of living. It is not a buzzword for them, sustainability. Yet to date, it is clearly a challenge for most of the peak, despite the large support from the donors. So the key challenge I came across on the project for me is the geography. Many islands requires many facilities. It's just a fact. You require many facilities, therefore you need to spend a lot of money looking after them, a lot of effort. Then there's this exposure to disaster. We talk a lot about the intensity, but it's really the occurrence, the problem. Some part of Pacific, you're looking at 2 category 3 minimum cyclone a year, and that's really wipe out an asset from one year to another. It just disappears. In terms of economy, private businesses really struggle to get access to credit, so it really creates troubles to have these fundings or these investments. There is a lack of financial resources because they got quite small budgets, the governments, and they got a lot of assets to look after. So sometimes it's up to 5% of their annual investment just to look at the existing portfolio. There's a lack of human resources. You saw is a very small population and material because you're far away from everything. There is limited access to training, equipment, and even sometimes to facility to look after this equipment. For example, there is no shipyard for any ship. There is a lack of oversight from the government. Revenue for the maritimes are generally reinvested directly into the national treasury for look after some very other important topics like health or education. But the problem by doing this circle, using the money for shorter goals, they create this spiral, this circle of they're not looking after their asset. Therefore, every 20 years, they undergo a major upgrade or complete rebuild of their asset, which is not sustainable financially speaking. Then there's a bit of a culture between government and donors. It's a lot easier to invest a large amount of money in one project quite short time, rather than commit a relatively low amount of money for a very long time. In terms of monitoring all those capital, it's a nightmare. So that's a bit in a nutshell all the challenges you got. Then I looked at sustainability, how to integrate a bit sustainability in terms of within the life cycle of a project, and that's through the project I delivered. I looked at various ways to do that, and I looked from the planning to the decommissioning. And planning, I really find out that talking to the locals to understand the setting, to integrate the facility within the settings, to make sure you minimize the impact, you minimize the exposure to disaster. That's probably the best things you can do. Then there's an understanding that they struggled with putting money aside for the infrastructure. So therefore, as part of the grants, it's very important to put certain amounts aside into a trust fund, which gets released through the life of the project to help them with the maintenance. And in terms of acquisition/construction, those islands are so remote that a design is not just designing a pylon deck without thinking. This is not Singapore. This is a very far, very remote island. The whole construction is driven by logistic, and it's where it's very important to discuss and having very early engagement with experienced maritime contractor on the region to actually try to come up with something feasible where you can actually mobilize some equipment, because no mobilization, you can't even build anything. Then there is as well consideration to the construction method, relying on heavy equipment or on manpower, and obviously using as much as possible what's available, which is quite scarce, but there is some elements. In terms of operation, is what is very nice to build some top-of-the-range facility is equally important to give the tools to the operators to understand how to use their facility to maintain it. And that's not just the operator, the local engineer and contractors, because you need to break a bit this dependence of seeking external help. You need to help them to have the tools to look after their own asset, to be a bit independent. Obviously, there's a need to limit the operational cost. That's quite common across the globe, and the use of resources. Maintenance is a given when we talk about life cycle. Obviously, we went to design something required less maintenance as possible, but that's not quite achievable. There's always need for some maintenance, and where there is this maintenance, try to integrate use of local material again to be able to have the local to support to repair their own facility. And finally, decommission. Nothing go to waste in Pacific. You cannot afford to go to have a structure or to have a piece of steel to go to waste. You really need to think about reusing material as much as possible. So the first case, that's the first project I presented to you earlier. That's the first video of the international port. We got a marine component, we got a yard component. There's a bit of upgrade and a bit of new structure. Very exciting project. If we look at the life cycle, how we try to integrate sustainability on that project, really the planning. Again, I went about 13 times in Tonga in a year and spending my time discussing, understanding the challenge with the port authority and really come up with solution with them. And that's really opened their eyes to maintenance. They weren't quite aware of the state of their own wharf until I went underneath and I started to show them picture. And that really creates an awareness amongst them that this trust fund is to help them, because if they got this pot of money, it will be another emergency, and this money will disappear when they need it. Then finally, for the construction part, we try to look at using high-quality material from abroad and limited them. So we use precast element concrete with very stainless steel, stainless steel reinforcement, very high quality. It's expensive, but the aim to do that is to actually limit the maintenance later on. And we try to integrate some local material where there is less exposure to the harsh maritime environment. In terms of operation, we really focus on doing some training about safety, maintenance, So they are fully aware of how to take care of their own asset and operate it. Then we looked at minimizing freshwater. Freshwater is very scarce on atoll islands. There's regular drought. So what we try to do here is we put a new firefighting system, and we went away from salt water because of corrosion issues. So we use fresh water, but we actually use rainwater. So we got a tank storing rainwater for firefighting, and we put solar and solar lighting where we could. Additionally, we look at maintenance, and we try to use a hybrid cathodic protection system, not using any power again, but providing this extra protection for the long run. Again, use of local material on non-exposed structure in the yard, in the building, and involve local contractor during construction. So there is a need for repair. Again, they got the way to fix it without seeking for help all the time. And finally, in terms of decommission, we demolish a whole wharf. So rather than throw the concrete away, we reuse the concrete to actually infill some rock bags, which provide better resilience against cyclone, because it's 2 cyclones a year in Tonga. The second project, that's the Tuvalu project. So there's a wharf, there's some earthwork and some building, and there's some winding of the existing channel. So in the design, we really looked at optimizing the location to make sure we make most of the geometries level of the reef, and try to limit the quantity for the impact. We try to put some natural-based solution, and we consider coastal processes as well. In terms of acquisition, it's very difficult to bring any equipment, so we rely on small excavator to build some suspended deck. We use the existing limestone where we could as part of the concrete. In terms of operation, because the channel is a lot more geometry is adjusted, it provides a much better, much safer navigation and reduce the wave climate. The same thing, we use rainwater, solar, and we got an harbor master trained to look after the asset and the people using it. In terms of maintenance, the new structure we designed to be submersible, to have a better resilience against cyclone. And where we couldn't on land, we raised the building to actually let the water go underneath. And finally, in terms of decommission, there is some existing on the island. And again, fresh water is very important to them. So we really looked at developing the whole land side and the building around those tanks. So not demolishing them. And that's it for my presentation today. We'll go to a Q&A session now. Thanks.
Thank you, David, for the very interesting presentation. I mean, before this, I knew very little about the Pacific, but I think and now I got quite a good idea from you. Really like what you said, that not a single drop in the Pacific will go into wasted. Everything will be reused. That's truly sustainable. So David, we have quite a few questions, and I'm sure we can cover them nicely. And everyone, please, if you have questions, keep them coming. We'll try to address them. So the first question for you, David, is that, do you know which Pacific island is the most severely threatened by climate change, sea level rise? And will that seriously impact its navigation sector?
So that's a very good question. Very simple. All the countries where there is mostly atoll, so Tuvalu, Kiribati are the one in danger. It was a very good speech done by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Tuvalu 2 days ago, with water to his waist, basically, and explaining he used to sit there as a little kid, and now it's about a meter underwater. So those places are very much impacted by that. Now, in terms of navigation, I'm not totally sure to see the connection, but obviously climate change is a big deal. It really impacts those islands, and they look at ways to stay above water, literally. Maritime infrastructure is one of the key components for them to keep having the goods to actually build more resilience community for them, raising the levels, having engineered solution, basically.
Okay. I mean, there's a lot of uncertainties definitely going into the future. So the second question, first of all, compliment for you, great presentation. And the question is, I was wondering how the increasing focus on reducing carbon footprint and emission globally will impact the Pacific Islands construction projects.
So impacting the island, definitely, because climate change, very simple, and what I just explained, they're drowning, literally, they facing the consequences of it directly in the daily situations. In terms of the work in the Pacific, I guess it will be a good thing to have the Pacific project, because the Pacific project, they are focused on getting more efficient. More efficient means less production of gases. And for example, Nuku'alofa, that's a project I was presenting. One of the key benefits of it is you got much larger ship can go there, 220 meters. So it means like you double the quantity of container in one ship. So you got a lot less carbon emissions straight away. And then we modernize the whole yard, so a lot more efficient, a lot less emission. So yeah, those projects will definitely benefit from that. It's very important.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to the next question. Were the construction materials sourced locally or from outside the Pacific?
Both. You can't, for example, it's very simple. You need steel. It's very difficult to build something without steel, and there is no mining at all on those islands, so that needs to be imported. Things like cement, you do not have cement, so that needs to be imported. But really what you could do is, what you got available is reef, mostly, and you do have some volcanic rock on some of these islands, so you use that for natural protection, coastal protection. The reef, you crush that in very small aggregates, so you can mix it into concrete. And you can use salt water as well to turn concrete, but obviously there is trick for that. You cannot expect those material to last 50 years, so you really need to think about where you're going to use it and knowing their limitations.
Oh, interesting. And moving on to the next question is, hello, David. In your opinion, what will be the major challenge in island tourism industry due to the climate change, including the resort and navigation?
Okay, so the climate change topic, the impact to those countries in terms of navigation. Navigation is a problem as we speak already. They don't have, a naval chart. They don't know where reef are. So it's already an hazard as we speak. Sea level rise is not going to improve things, obviously, because you got some existing, very low-lying island will be underwater, so we make the risk even greater. Then in terms of the rest of the sector, obviously, you're losing lands and islands, and you end up more concentrated on a small part. So that's definitely not a good thing. And those islands, you just have to remember, they hardly got any industry. They survive from fishing and from the money we provide and tourism. That's really the three things. Yeah.
Agree. And to the last question, this one is rather long. This is from Sebastian. So David, if I'm not mistaken, I see areas with a great potential to develop mangroves and other type of coastal natural habitats.
Yes.
Is the design of port infrastructure in these islands somehow considering enhancing these natural habitats?
That's an extremely good question. Obviously, when you got a big international port and they are an existing port, that's a bit difficult to do that because this is industrial site we're talking about. But when you look at the outer island, the second project in Tuvalu, definitely, and we use local plants and we listen to the locals how you have to plant them because vegetation just don't go like that. You really need to nurture them. And we include, I can't say the name because I forgot the name of this quite complicated name, but we're looking at putting quite a lot of low-lying grass on the foreshore to really protect those sand dunes because they get eroded as soon as there is a cyclone. We're looking to put behind a bit of a buffer, 15 meters of buffer, again to protect a bit and put some coconut tree to really finish to anchor the whole ground because everyone lives behind. And generally the beach dune is the highest point of view of the island. It's about 3 meters, and everyone behind the dunes live another meter below. So if this dune is impacted and damaged, you flood it. So yes, we definitely need to consider that. You can't just put concrete everywhere. You really need to look at what nature come across, what system nature develop. So yeah, no, that's definitely a very good question, and something, yes, in terms of sustainability, you need to consider.
Yes, definitely. I like the question also because it emphasized the concept of working with nature, which is what we champion at Piang nowadays.
Yeah, and to come back to this project, yeah, we really looked at the structure in a way, the new wharf, in a way that we will not disrupt the natural flow. Longshore sediment is a big deal. We really looked at what can we do to actually do not impact that, and that wasn't the easiest way to do it. It ended up to be the most costly way, but in long term, if you didn't consider that, we'll have to build a Great Wall of China, literally, to protect that. So you will create your own downfall, creating more structure to protect people. So yeah, it's a prime consideration, especially in atoll islands where you got a big fringing reef. It's a key consideration.
Interesting. Thank you for the added information. And that's all the questions. So I think we are just right on time. So thank you, David. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. How was the networking session? I think it's pretty cool, right? Some of you texted me saying that it was quite fun. If you missed that one, don't worry. There will be more breaks coming up, and every break you have the chance to join this virtual networking. So I would like to give a great shout out to Komana for designing this nice virtual networking event. So now let's move on to our second presentation of the day. And before that, let us get to know not one, but two speakers for this session. So today we have from Delta Marine Consultants and Young Professional Piang Singapore, Yan Chi Chim and John Ray Manoe, or Jay. So first up, Yan Chi has over 6 years of experience in the design, project management, and construction of coastal and infrastructure projects, as well as environmental and climate change related projects. She has involved in a broad phase of projects delivery, from master planning, feasibility studies to detailed design and construction management, not just in Singapore, but also across the globe. So Yan Chi was in fact the key technical team member for the Singapore nationwide coastal adaptation study. She has looked into the aspect of vulnerability of the coastlines and also come up with adaptation options such as long-term strategic plan for the country coastal protection. She also has coastal and geotechnical design experiences, particularly in coastal protection structures, about revetment and earthbound, and she was in fact involved in the reclamation in Manila Bay in the Philippines and in Cambodia, and also in drainage infrastructure design for the shipyard at Tuas West in Singapore, and the flood mitigation device concept design at Jurong Island. And apart from that, she was also involved in the design of habitat enhancement structure at the coastal park, incorporating built with nature features. And her current portfolio brought her to numerical modeling of thermal plume dispersion for a floating structure in Singapore, slope stability analysis, and power displacement modeling for jetties upgrade in Philippines. The second speaker, John, also has an equally impressive background. So John has over 10 years of experience in the planning, design, construction, and management for projects in coastal and hydraulic engineering. He has vast experience in the design of coastal protection structures, such as revetment, breakwater, seawall, etc. He also experienced in numerical modeling and physical modeling, frequently working at DMC in-house water laboratory, and he was involved in some of integral design of flood defenses and marina for projects in Netherlands, Kasbah Bet, sorry for my bad pronunciation, and also in the primary flood protection and breakwater protection for the marina, as well as the iconic enclosure dike project in the Netherlands, right, where the old dikes were strengthened and raised to preserve the nearby fishing habitat. So John has also had some involvement in a lot of global coastal projects in Europe, America, South Asia, as well as Africa and Middle East. So previously he has spent close to 2 years as senior coastal engineer in Dubai, UAE, and now he's based in Singapore and lead the delivery of the coastal and maritime services for Southeast Asia. So after that long introduction, then you get to see the topic that we have presenting to you, which is managing coastal protection and climate change adaptations. Very interesting topic. And again, before I invite both of them come up, please, if you have any questions for our presentations, just insert that into the Slido. And again, towards the end of the presentation, we will just address these to our speakers. So Yan, Chi, and Jay, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending our session today. Today we will be sharing on the managing coastal protection and climate change adaptation. So we all know that climate change is impacting our coastal region with potentially destructive impact, and our coastline is susceptible to more flooding and erosion due to rising sea level and increased incidence of extreme weather event. So today we will be sharing of how we at Delta Marine Consultants develop the efficient and adaptive coastal protection measures that is resilient to future climate. And we will also cover 2 case studies of our coastal protection projects and how it can be applied in Asia. Yes. One of the largest challenges in long-term climate change projection is the uncertainty and how it can be incorporated in the planning and design of coastal protection. So every IPCC different CRI's projections will be given with different ranges, and how can the policy planner and the engineer take this into account. So it is very important to develop efficient and adaptive coastal protection which is resilient to future climate. We cannot build all the coastal protection at one go, as there may be resistance from the public, and it is also not adaptive enough. Climate change will lead to sea level rise and higher wave and more disruptive impact. Therefore, coastal adaptation is needed. Where possible, soft structure is generally preferred as they will bring additional benefits such as social benefit, ecological benefit, such as beaches, dunes, and mangrove. However, if the sea level rise increases more significantly, hard structure is necessary to act as a supplement also. Hard structure protection example could be revolvement ground. So we are from Singapore. Traditionally, rock armor is used more in our country. Concrete armor generally is used more for larger wave. However, with wave height increases and more new projects developed in more exposed location going into the sea, we see more demand for concrete armor, as at higher wave height location you will need larger logs, and they may become uneconomical, and you need to bring the transport in the rock from a longer distance, and this would lead to higher CO2 emission. For milder wave condition, we see that concrete armor will be becoming a more viable choice. Single layer armor has been proven as a solid technology with multiple billion blocks applied in larger than 400 projects. Compared to double layer concrete armor, single layer armor is designed with zero damage concept. They are more susceptible to larger wave height. They use lesser concrete consumption, less CO2 emission, more resilient to climate change, and we can save construction time and cost. So we'll be sharing 2 of our case study in the Netherlands. One is Austra Dijk, the closure dike in Katzand. So my colleague Jay will present first on the Katzand project. Jay.
Yes, thank you, Yanchi. All right. So here's a short overview and background of the project in Katzand that the DMC has been involved in and completed in 2016. Katzand is a small village in the southwest of the Netherlands, facing the rough North Sea. According to the Dutch law on flood defenses, it is mandatory to evaluate the hydraulic boundary conditions along the Dutch coastline every 5 years. The primary flood defenses along the coastline are then assessed based on these conditions and reinforced where necessary. For the primary flood defenses at Katsan Bat, it was required to protect against climate change and should be able to withstand 1 in 4,000 year conditions. After the assessment of the condition of these flood defenses back then, it was considered a weak link in the coastal defense system and therefore needed to be upgraded in order to ensure the water safety. So this upgrade of the coastal protection was a nice opportunity for the local municipality and the local tourist industry, and together with the water authorities, they teamed up to combine the upgrade of the coastal defense with the upgrade of the public space and construction of marina. So yeah, this combination was challenging because of different interests and requirements from various stakeholders. And all the involved structures had a strong interaction and constructed in a very limited area. So this made it a complex integral project because the primary flood defense need to withstand 1 in 4,000 year storm conditions, while the marina and public works were designed against 1 in 50 to 1 in 100 year conditions. So for example, the breakwaters were required to function as flood defense, as well as to create calm wave conditions in the marina. Another example is a garage constructed inside the dike. And on the left side, you see a yacht clubhouse. So the foundation piles of this clubhouse were constructed in the breakwater. So the primary flood defenses consist of west and east of the marina, where a total of 1 kilometer dune and beach had to be reinforced. And integrated in the dunes at the east side of the marina, a 150-meter dike had to be reinforced as well. So the dunes and beaches were designed to withstand dune erosion caused by this superstorm of 1 in 4,000 year, combined with the predicted coastline retreat over a period of 4 years. The dike itself was designed to be stable during the same 1 in 4,000 year storm condition and a required maximum overtopping rate of 0.1 liter per second per meter. The design levels and volumes were to be nourished such that if this storm occurs, a minimum safety profile will still be available to ensure that water safety and to protect the village. So on the left side, you can see the projection of the project battery limit. The cross shore lines, the black lines, are the survey lines that are being conducted annually. And this actually happens along the entire Dutch coastlines. And on the right side, the colors represent the dune and beach volumes that have been nourished. Interesting here is that all the required sand volumes came from the dredge basin and the approach channel of the constructed marina. And actually, part of this sand was also used as breakwater core at the roots of the breakwater. So obviously this was a huge cost saving because no hopper was mobilized, and it also reduced the CO2 impact significantly. The existing dike directly east of the marina has been reinforced and optimized, and the lower part of the dike has been removed due to the predicted erosion profile. With this, more sand became available to reach the equilibrium erosion profile. And the removed asphalt revetment has been recycled as well and used in certain parts of the breakwater core. The transition from the dike in dune construction into the dunes around that has been designed and constructed to prevent undermining of the structure caused by the dune erosion. And yeah, if you go to the site itself, it's completely covered by sand, so you can't see it. So the Marina Construction. So part of the project is the Marina Construction. This marina was designed to accommodate 125 boats, and were exposed to requirements for safety and comfort. And inside the marina, you can see the central flood defense consisting of a pump station. This is considered a primary flood defense, and as such to be protected against the 1 in 4,000 year storm, and yeah, the required limiting overtopping rates. This obviously depends on the wave heights of the pump station, and it's therefore controlled by the breakwaters. So the breakwaters were also designed to withstand this superstorm. Yeah, so as I mentioned, it was the breakwaters were designed to withstand this superstorm, but they may have limited damage. The breakwaters are protected by X-block armor layer, and on the exposed parts of the western breakwater, 4 cubic meters are installed, and the rear and the eastern breakwater, these are covered with 1.5 cubic meter of X-blocks. Interesting is also that these blocks were casted in the nearby port of Zeebrugge, so all the blocks were transported to site by barges, and this minimized the disturbance of the public spaces and public roads, but also the construction works on shore. Yeah, this also led to significant reduction of the CO2 emission. Here's another slide of the breakwater construction. One thing that I would like to add here are the architectural elements on the breakwater. These are not wave walls, but just furniture placed on top of the breakwater to sit on. Okay. Last. So during the project, we faced challenges and learned some lessons. And in this slide, I would like to highlight a few of them. So the strong interaction between wet and dry structures and hard and soft structures, all built in a very small area, made it a complex project. A superstorm with a return period of 1 in 4,000 years was also challenging to design for. But if you look at the Western Netherlands, the required superstorm to be designed for is 1 in 10,000 year storm. A lesson learned in is the assessment of the project risk. In this case, this area was a hot battlefield during World War II, so we experienced delay due to unexploded bombs and sea mines that needed to be cleared from the project area. Due to strong collaboration with the marine contractor, we managed to optimize the design and eventually led to significant construction cost savings. Another lesson learned is safety. As this area is a touristic area, many people pay a visit to the beaches and are very curious about the ongoing constructions. So clear signs and instructions, safety instructions were necessary to be implemented. And also the architectural elements should be designed against extreme loads, and the architectural walkways should be able to cope with erosion during storms. So now I'd like to, Yanchi will continue with the presentation again.
Yes, so the next project we'll be sharing is the Austradat project in the Netherlands. So in English, it's called the Enclosure Dike. So this project is actually ongoing, and we are very proudly to represent this project because much of Netherlands lies below sea level, and this Austradat has protected the Netherlands from catastrophic flooding for almost 90 years. So this dike is built to dam out the sea and turn the water body behind into a lake. Yep, so some more overview of what Austradat is. It is a 32-kilometer closure dike between the Walden Sea and the lake behind. Its primary function is to protect against storm condition from the sea and discharge high water from the lake and the river. It is originally completed in 1932. And after all these years, it doesn't comply with the legislated water safety standards anymore. And due to sea level rise and higher wave height, more water needs to be drained out. Therefore, reinforcement is required. It is designed to be upgraded for up to 10,000 year return period event. So what the Austradat reinforcement project consists of, the dike will be reinforced, so the old revetment level will be strengthened by our innovative Explore Plus system, which is specifically developed for this project, and we will elaborate that in the later slides. The dike is increased by 2 meters, and to protect the lowland behind the dike, more discharge sluices will be constructed and the existing one will be upgraded. As with increased more rainwater, more water is needed to be drained out into the sea. And when the water level at the sea is high, it cannot be drained out and we need more pumping station to pump out the water. So the largest pump station in the Europe will be installed of up to 300 meter cube per second. The expressway will be renovated and additional cycle path will be built. So how to discharge the high water from the lake? We will add 2 more discharge sluices and largest pumping station in the Europe. Energy efficient is built into the project, and the pumping station will be operated by solar panels of 2.7 hectare. And specifically, a fish migration river is being built, which will enable the fish to flow from their national spawning ground, and a 2.7 kilometer fish migration river is built. So the fish can transit from salt water into the lake water. The key innovation is also being built by installing a fiber reinforced plastic floodgate in the river. For that reinforcement is being increased by 2 meters. The width is being increased and renewal of the primary armor layer using our Explore Plus. Because the wave load on the lower slope is expected to be higher, so a larger Explore Plus is being installed. In this project, it's called level blocks because of the consortium constructing this project is called level. On the upper slope, the expected wave load is lesser. Therefore, the armor installed are quadrupods. For long-term water safety, Austradat is designed for up to 10,000 year storm event, and the design structure life for this armor are actually 100 years. They are being tested in the delta from of scale of 1 to 3 with overload and 10% weaker model for 1 year of testing. Due to its innovative shape, it is able to achieve 56% saving on CO2 footprint compared to the reference design. We expect no maintenance for this Explore Plus, and the existing basalt columns have been replaced in the past 90 years. For this project, 75,000 blocks will be installed to give the dam a smooth and stable appearance as required by the article. Although it looks smooth, but it is actually rough. They are being connected like Lego bricks, but they are able to withstand high wave during storm condition. They are 2.5 meter cube, and as seen in this figure here, they are comparable to a human size of 1.13 meter height. We aim to make more efficient use of concrete by reducing the amount and simplifying the placement process. The blocks are very large and create major saving in time and money. So how are they being installed? The installation is very easy. Using a clamp block, allow quick block placement through an excavator gripper. Due to the regular placement pattern, the placement rate can be achieved much faster. A hole is included in the armor block to reduce the water pressure under the block, and this is very beneficial for lifting and installation of the blocks, because for the upstrata dike, it is a very critical project and a critical structure, and the expressway is still in operation. The construction is conducted from sea via a floating pontoon. So more photos of how the dikes are being strengthened and the expressway is being improved. The blocks are casted via automated process, and around 100 blocks are produced every day in a dedicated plant. So each block has a chip for easy tracking during the manufacturing, storage, and transport, and they are brought to the dike by ship and placed using via floating pontoon. Okay, so this is a picture of the floating pontoon and how the construction is done via the sea, while the car can still goes on the behind side at the dike. So this slide is on how the construction process of our X blocks can be monitored via Ecoscope, which is a high resolution 3D images in real time, unique solar technology. So it enables the operator to visualize, monitor, and place a concrete armor protection underwater in real time, which we can adjust how the blocks are being placed and track its position and orientation. So some of the project summary, the challenges we face is that during construction, it is critical to maintain the water safety and discharge capacity of the sources. The dike is a main route link, so all material have to be supplied via the marine side. The Walden Sea is a national reserve, so the space for dike reinforcement is limited and we have to work within the space we have. Some of the lessons learned is that at the start of concrete, there is insufficient hydraulic boundary condition available, and this has been causing some delay of the project. There is conflicting architectural and functional requirement of the primary armor layer surface, but we're able to solve it by our innovative shape. The X-block plus automated production learning curve need to be accounted for in the construction project. So it is being produced slower at the start, and it only becoming faster when the production process is being learned. X-block plus armor shows similar stability and waterproofing results at both 2D physical model testing with various scale of 1 to 3, 1 to 20, and 1 to 20 showing promising results. So how can all this of our project experience being translated into Singapore, which is traditionally we use more of rock removal. So Singapore is a small country with 30% of its land below 5 meters above sea levels, and the government is very committed in the climate change adaptation journey, with the Prime Minister saying that combating climate change is a life and death matter, and we are very exciting of that, meaning that us as a coastal engineer will play a bigger role in protecting the country. So as Delta Marine consultants, we see that X-block, our armor layer X-block and X-block plus has great potential for application in Singapore. X-block plus is a modular block which enables effective integration with various features. They are regularly shaped. They enable urban integration, which is important in a small country like Singapore. It can be built at steeper slope of up to 1 to 2 or up to 1.33, enables effective land usage compared to traditional rock of require 1 to 3 slope. It is also adaptable to future enhancements, so we can build at a lower height now, and it can be further increase the crash height in the future. It is also very easy replaceable, minimal maintenance required, and they can be applied as a short protection for large-scale deck structure or at the existing coast, where the existing road revetment can be successfully replaced using our armor layer. Our S-Block or S-Block Plus are also have good feature of integrating with ecological functions. They have high porosity of up to 60%. The concrete surface can be roughened to further promote organism growth. They can retain water and act as natural tidal pool and incorporate greenery planting or mangrove. So that's the end of our presentation.
Thank you so much, Yanqi and Jay, for the presentation. I like it when Yanqi quoted the Prime Minister of Singapore that it is a life and death measure, and you were smiling, saying that we'll get more works, from this, right? It's our duty to protect the coastline. That was nicely said, yeah. Okay, so Yanqi and Jay, we have quite a number of questions in the slide, so I'll bring it up one by one. I'll let you decide who want to answer that. The first question is, for the Kazan project, is the nourishment one-off, or it needs to be nourished regularly?
So every year it has to be checked for the coastal retreats, and every 4 years the trend, if it's like retreating all the time, and then of course it has to be nourished.
Okay, noted on that. Yeah, thank you for that. And the second question is, I think it's referring to the Kazan project, because the question is, any particular reason why 1 in 4,000 years design was used instead of 1 in 10,000 years?
I think the simple answer to that is that there's the economic value of the western part of Netherlands is higher than the southern part of Netherlands.
Okay,
so
got
that's why the return period is slightly lower.
Okay, thank you for that. And the next question is to John. I mean, it's to Jay. Yeah, you mentioned the 5-year design check requirement by law. Is there a longer term plan, or it is just done at that interval?
There must be. I mean, I think back then it was indeed every 5 years. So maybe nowadays the law has been updated, but this interval of 5 years that was required back then, and I think that's still the same unless it's updated.
Okay, so that means for the foreseeable future that will be maintained, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And the next question is regarding the Afusdijk. Sorry if I pronounce correctly. Afusdijk. What degree of increase do you expect for the waves, and what are the causes of the increase? Sea level rise or stronger winds?
Sorry, can you say it?
Yes, I can repeat again. It's for the Afusdijk project. So what degree of increase do you expect for the waves, and what are the causes of the increase? Is it sea level rise, or is the stronger wind that lead to the higher waves that you are looking to design?
I think it could be both. It could be both, because it's an old structure, and now it needs to be designed for a more future event, and we are designing for 50 year, and the standards in the old time is less stringent.
So that means you do like, I think the question framed in a way is that when you talk about stronger winds, that means it's also about storm surge. So you are saying that storm surge is also included in those analysis, right?
Yes. So it's both.
Yeah. So okay, thank you for that. And the next question is, what is the reason different types of blocks are used in lower and upper slope in the case of the Afusdijk?
Because we expect a higher wave at lower slope, so we use a larger block. So the blocks are actually very large comparable to a main level. But on the upper slope, we expect a lower wave height, and we also have a berm which act as a cycle path. So much lower wave load is expected on the upper slope. So smaller blocks can be used, can reduce the construction cost and the material.
Yes, that's true. Thank you for that. And the last question here is, what about the visual impact? This is not referring to any project. It's just what about the visual impact?
Yes. So for me, I think S-Fast is really pretty, and that has been because it's being developed after many rounds of discussion with the architect, because for Netherlands they need to make the dike looks really pretty. So we develop a regular shape. So it looks pretty to me, and it yeah, and you can see that from one of the slide picture, because of the tidal and the wave, so naturally it has the green color at below. So we are very proud of our development of the Export Plus. We think they are pretty of the regular shape placement. This is very different from the conventional single layer armor. Yeah, so that's why we think we are very proud of our Export Plus, and we think that it has great opportunity for urban integration. And we see there's much more opportunity for discussion with urban planner architect of how it can be further enhanced, because it is a very flexible structures. So because they are being connected like a Lego brick, so as long as we ensure that the connection point are maintained and the stability is maintained, and the other area can actually be modified. Yeah, so we actually have ideas of like we can change it to mimic like a rock shape or other features project specifically.
Yep.
That's the answer to the question.
And hopefully I'll get a chance to admire the visual prettiness when I'm gonna be in Netherlands in the future. So I'll definitely visit the dike. Yeah.
Yes, and we hope that we can apply the block in more other project locations also. Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yes.
Okay. So that's all the questions that we have. So we are just on time. Very well done.
Welcome back, everyone. If you're wondering why the moderator's face has changed, Jack has handed over the reins to me, and I'll now be joining you from sunny Australia, the land down under. My name is Jordan Butler. I'm representing PIANC Australia. Just a little bit about me. I'm a maritime structural engineer working in the Asia-Pacific region, primarily in Australia, with the firm Walbridge Gilbert Aztec, which is a maritime specialist. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to a much more interesting maritime engineer than myself. So Ingrid Lambert works as a port consultant at Royal Haskoning DHV based in the Netherlands. Has 4 years experience in a range of ports planning related and feasibility studies across Africa, Asia Pacific and Europe. She obtained her Bachelor of Engineering degree in Civil Engineering at Stellenbosch University, South Africa in 2015. And 2019 went on to obtain her Master's in Coastal and Marine Engineering and Management. Ingrid will be talking to you today about climate and disaster resilience for ports through adaptation planning. I'll now hand over to Ingrid. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordan, for the very nice introduction, and welcome, audience. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining from. Thank you for listening to my presentation. If you have joined the previous two presentations, you'd know that they are two very good introduction presentations to my presentation today. David first introduced the Pacific Islands, on which I have a case study, and the previous presentation was on coastal climate adaptation, and mine looks at ports. So I'll be discussing climate and disaster resilience for ports through adaptation planning, focusing on an overview of the PIANC Working Group Report 178, representing the PIANC Permanent Task Group on Climate Change, as I am the young professional representative there. I will first have a short personal introduction adding to what Jordan already said, and then introducing you to the case study we're looking at, a port in Tonga, then the need for climate change adaptation planning for ports, followed by the PIANC guidance that I'll be focusing on, and there is a audience question, so please have your phones at the ready, and then on to the climate and disaster risk assessment that was undertaken for the port in Tonga, application of the PIANC guidance, and afterwards closing and of course your questions. As Jordan said, I'm South African, but now I'm working in the Netherlands for the last 2 years at Royal Haskoning DHV. And in terms of PIANC, for almost the last 2 years, I've been one of the young professional representatives in the group called Permanent Task Group on Climate Change. This is a cross-commission group within PIANC dealing with climate issues and related guidance for the maritime sector. An example is we've got what we call climate champions who are active members within the other commissions, so say the Environmental Commission or the Maritime Commission, and they review existing or previous guidance reports written and published by PIANC and see where climate change needs to be considered or if the reports need to be updated, and yeah, we're the go-to group if there's any questions on climate change. If you have more questions on that, please send them over to the question box and we can discuss later. On to our case study. So we go to the South Pacific Ocean, where the Kingdom of Tonga lies, with islands, some 170 islands, I think, of which 36 are inhabited. And we look at the Nuku'alofa port, where the Queen Salota International Wharf is situated. This is a very remote island, as we know, which is vulnerable to many social and economic issues, as David, my colleague, actually already introduced in a previous presentation this morning. This is Tonga's largest port and handles 85% of all cargo coming into Tonga. So you can imagine that the local community and people of Tonga really rely very much on the port and the imports. The port has been falling behind a bit the last couple of years, and so a feasibility study was undertaken for the upgrade of the Queen Salota International Wharf. This is funded by the Asian Development Bank for the upgrade and modernization of the port, as well as to climate-proof the port. In the previous presentation, sorry if you weren't there the previous time, David showed a very nice video. Unfortunately, I did not have that video as my presentation focuses on something else. But within that same study, there is a climate risk and vulnerability assessment and a disaster risk assessment undertaken, which I will be looking into. So the Tonga is very vulnerable to natural disasters, and climate and natural hazards pose a significant threat to development projects on a national and regional development goals. Disasters here have a high occurrence and intensity, including tropical cyclones, earthquakes, and tsunamis. A recent example is the Cyclone Harold in 2020, April 2020, that occurred in Tonga. And here are some images you can see just the devastation in terms of the coastal impacts. And the next picture as well, debris everywhere, and obviously consequences thereafter. Not only that, the port was also impacted by the cyclone, which included ponding and flooding, as you can see in the pictures, damage to assets and disruption to port operations. Moving on, in terms of climate change adaptations planning, it's very important to understand the climate and disaster setting within where the port is situated. Not only is Tonga prone to tropical cyclones, earthquake and tsunamis, but rainfall, wind and waves and sea level rise are other climate change elements that are really relevant to understand and further dive into. Why is this? So Tonga is listed, or has previously been listed, as the second worst affected small island developing state by the consequences of climate change, based on a study for GDP. In the latest IPCC report that was published a few months ago, the climate of small islands has and will continue to change in diverse ways, and it's important to note that constructing climate information for small islands is challenging. This could be due to a lack of observations or high-resolution projections. The World Economic Forum rates extreme weather and climate action failure as the two greatest risks in the world today. and it said that there is a risk of significant trade disruption if ports are not adapted. This is just some pieces to show you that there is an urgent need for ports to adapt. The recent COP26 also highlighted adaptation on a more wider sector scale recently, and this is also said in this PIANC Working Group 178 report that I'll be discussing. I'm very interested to know what you as an audience know already about working group number 178. And so please get your phones ready to answer the question. In the next slide, there will be a QR code with a repeated list of questions. And thereafter, I will be discussing more about this report. What do we call climate adaptation? How do we refer to that? Why is there this guidance? And I'll take you through the 4-step approach that we have in the PIANC guidance. So here we've got the QR code. Please scan your phones now and use the hashtag PIANC21 as code. And then I'd like to know from you, seeing as this is an online event and I can't interact with you directly or not yet, so we've got the breakout room thereafter. I'd like to know if maybe one of you in this audience has contributed to the PIANC Working Group report, or you've previously used the guidance in a project, or say referred to it in a request for proposal, depending in which sector you are here, or you've previously just read the report, or you only know about it, or this is completely new to you. I know yesterday we had quite a number of non-PIANC members before, so maybe this is very new to you, in which case the rest of my presentation would be very interesting. So let's give you a couple of moments to vote, or not vote, choose which option is applicable to you. I hear that answers are coming in. And more are coming in. I think we can go to the next slide to show some answers already. Oh, that's good news for me. This is new to me, it's very high. That's great. Let's see. Still all mostly, majority is new to me. That's very nice. So I hope you enjoy the rest of my presentation and learn something so that you can use the PIANC report in future projects. I think you can carry on voting, but I will, based on time, continue with the presentation for now. So listen up. Did I press the button? Yes, okay. In terms of climate change terminology, the report defines adaptation as a response or a process of adjustment to accommodate the actual or projected climate or the effects of climate change. So we look at any measures or interventions or investments that can be taken over time to reduce the effects of climate change that would be applicable to that, say port, to make the asset or the system less vulnerable. So the impact is not as large. Through adaptation, this builds resilience, which is the capacity to anticipate and plan for disruptions, absorb the impact of disturbances, and rapidly recover afterwards. Good to note here as well that there is another PIANC Working Group report 193 that's dedicated to resilience for the whole maritime water transport sector, and covers 4 stages: preparing, withstanding damages and absorbing impacts, recovering, and again, adaptation. So adaptation, very important. Moving on, why do we need this this guidance for climate change adaptation? So we all know that climate change can result in various different impacts. As I already said, rainfall, sea level rise, flooding, all those are options, but this is very site specific and can be complex. And long-term planning, there's lots of uncertainty. So this PIANC guidance sets out an approach to make it easier to use. Climate change is likely to result in changes in precipitation characteristics, which will increase the frequency or severity of high flows or flooding, or even drought. Sea level rise leads to flooding, and flooding can also result from storm surges or changes in sea state. Current strengths are important to consider, both in rivers and at ports where berths can be affected, and so vessel motions will be impacted. Changes in sediment transport can increase erosion and accretion and affect maintenance dredging, say. Increasing air and water temperature, and not only that, but ocean acidity, leads to changes in biological character and characteristic species, meaning there can be different vegetation growth, species migration, or invasive species affecting the area. Depending where you are in the world, there can be changes in icing and snowmelt characteristics. Extreme heat or humidity and heat stress is important to account for paving surfaces of ports or load-bearing equipment. And then, of course, changes in wind linked to, say, cyclones or any other storm, both in speed, direction, or duration. And this can, for example, affect storm fastening cranes. There's a definite, let me go back, actually. Just to conclude the slide, these changes can impact on infrastructure integrity, affect navigational safety, lead to downtime, disrupt business continuity, and so this guidance helps us. Ports and waterways, we see, is a vital role in economic growth and development, and to ensure climate change resilience, that is of local, national, and international importance. And so this Piang guidance introduces a stepwise process to climate change adaptation planning. Stage 1 is understanding the context and objectives. Where is your port? Where is it situated? What's the local circumstances? Stage 2 is collating all your climate information, understanding the climate and disaster settings, for example. Stage 3 is assessing your vulnerabilities and risks, which then feed into your adaptation options that you look into, and so you go on. It's important to note that in all 4 of these stages, stakeholder engagement is very important. Now we'll look into a little bit more detail in each of these stages. Stage 1, understanding the context and setting objectives. Important here to engage stakeholders, develop goals, prepare inventory of critical infrastructure, establish roles and responsibilities, and set objectives. For each of these stages, you can see a flow diagram set out. So first, high-level goals are set out. This depends on what the goal of the project is, what's the planning horizon. Do we want to look at 10 years? Do we want to look at 30 years or beyond? Is there policy already in place? What is the aim of the client? Inventory of your critical assets, so a site investigation is needed, and determining which are your most important assets or systems within your supply chain, within the port, and affecting other interdependencies, which will be bottlenecks or so on, and which need to be accounted for. Also, what data you need, where you get this data, wave climate, wind climate, water levels, etc. Do you need to look at national level data, or is only global data available? Are there local studies, etc.? Important notes not to forget is interdependencies, which include utilities, services, onward transport modes, supply chain networks. You can think if there's a rail system starting from the port, or the trucks, that all is also affected in the supply chain, and mutually beneficial solutions may be found, which can reduce adaptation costs. Criticality not only affects assets or physical assets, but can relate to business continuity needs, network connectivity issues, threshold exceedances, as well as health and safety. The status of an asset or system will influence its future adaptive capacity. Monitoring and awareness are vital for decision making, and I'll come back to monitoring later. It's important for the stakeholder engagement to define the acceptable level of risk. Stage 2 is collating all your climate information. So I won't go through all this, but very important, you need to understand your baseline conditions first before you look at the projected changes and what that impact is on the hazards. Don't forget to include projected trends, but also look at extreme events or joint occurrences. You need to reduce the risk of maladaptation, which is, for example, a measure that is inadequate or built too early and is excessive at the time. You need to consider all plausible climate change scenarios and not only the worst case, but also likely. And the planning horizon is very important. On to stage 3, assessing vulnerabilities and risks. Here you typically consider the likelihood and the consequences to develop, say, a risk matrix, which helps inform decision making. Important notes not to forget is, say, if a very detailed risk assessment is not possible, a vulnerability assessment can suffice. Changes in climate parameters can have consequences on a range of consequences, and the color-coded matrix, as I said, can help with decision making. Onto the last stage is preparing adaptation pathways. Here you identify, screen, evaluate, implement, and monitor measures, prepare an adaptation strategy, and manage data effectively. What is an adaptation pathway, for example? A sequence of actions, measures, modifications, or interventions that are implemented as conditions change. And that is where monitoring comes into play, and you need to assess over time so that you have different options, and depending on trigger points assessed or reached, you then decide to build something or intervene. Consider the consequences of inaction. There's always a do nothing option to assess what could happen. Climate change will need innovative and flexible solutions. Prepare adaptation pathways with temporary or low regret measures. These are usually the short-term measures at the start of your strategy. Retrofitting can be costly and complex. You need to understand adaptive capacity, and an option evaluation can be simple, but usually the conventional evaluation methods may not be appropriate. The guidance sets out a portfolio of measures which are characterized by type, say physical, which refers to all structural measures, increasing a key wall height, etc. Social measures are people-based, so training, educational, what the people's behavior is. Institutional refers to governance, what policies are in place, what happens with marine spatial planning, etc. The role of monitoring I mentioned is very important, and you need data management to inform when action is needed. You need to monitor your asset condition. You can look at early warning systems to be put in place. This recording of impacts is important to support a business case, and monitoring does not need to be sophisticated, but you need to be fit for purpose. If you can think, Tonga needs different monitoring techniques to, say, the Port of Rotterdam. Prioritize maintenance to maximize resilience and improve adaptive capacity. Adaptive management can help deal with uncertainties, but needs data. Application of this for the climate and disaster risk assessment that was I showed you in Tonga, stage 1 through to stage 4. If we look at stage 1 very briefly, it included literature review, site investigation, a condition assessment, survey, and stakeholder consultation. And here's some images to show, say, the survey and the site conditions. Stage 2, also literature review, important for data analysis of climate and disaster settings. You use your latest climate change projections and see what the exposure is for the future. Stage 3, climate vulnerability and risk, defining what are the high and extreme risks to the port. And lastly, identifying project-specific climate and disaster resilience measures with different options and a multi-criteria assessment, as well as including investment costs. A little bit more detail in this. Number 1, a condition assessment, and for the Tonga case, the condition of Wharf 1 was of main immediate concern, and other main issues included safety, lighting, drainage, capping beam, sheet piles, fenders, and mooring at Wharf 2 and 3. On to stage 2, as I said before, you need to understand the climate and disaster setting of your site-specific port. And here I'd like to just say, tropical cyclones was defined as the most important factor to include, and that depends on stakeholder engagement. So you really need to talk to the client and the port authority and the community to understand what they view as their perceived acceptable risk, or so on. Then onto our matrix I've mentioned. Here is a list of hazards that was considered, and as I said, the tropical cyclone was identified as the extreme risk for a projected future risk, which could lead to flooding and inundation, safety measures, and even port shutdown due to a tropical cyclone, and of course then downtime. And if there's damages, the port may need to be fixed or refurbished later. On to number 4, just to conclude the resilience measures that were decided on. There were 4 options, 4 design options, and these all were influenced by the climate and disaster risk assessment. And so there's specific measures linked to the climate and disaster risk assessment. Sea level rise, instead of, say, what could be considered maladaptation to increase the full port level, only the wharf extension was planned, and there's accommodation to, in the future, allow for a higher port level, and only the yard level itself is to be raised in the short term, because that is more critical at this time. Wind and rain is also two factors, and rainfall, especially where they will provide drainage, and that will help with flooding. I think my time is almost up, so on to the final slide. I hope you enjoyed my presentation and you learned a lot. I went a bit fast through the last few things. I apologize. If there's questions, please refer to the Slido link, and I think Jordan will continue with questions. If you want to reach out to me personally, please write down my email address there, and you can also find out more about the Permanent Task Group on Climate Change through the PIANC website. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ingrid. That was absolutely fantastic. I personally have been following this report and have read it through, and it's very interesting. And I think that some of the comments that we're receiving currently really speak to that as well. People are generally very interested in climate change and how it's going to affect the way we work. And obviously, PIANC being at the forefront of that is necessary for our industry. We have a question here from Esteban Biondi, and Esteban asks, WG178 report is rather detailed and has many requirements that ports in SIDs may not have all the information for. Did you simplify the guidance to apply it?
Yeah, so I do agree that the guidance is quite detailed, but I think you need to read it in context of what your site-specific port is. It goes through all the detail for the case where that is applicable, but very general scenarios are given, as well as more specific that you could apply to your port. So yeah, it would take some time. I think that's why we've got these presentations to provide an overview, at least, of all the stages that are necessary, and there's a executive summary or applicable appendices that you can refer to for quick reference to something specific. But of course, yeah, say in terms of different sites, it's not everything is available. If you take data, for example, a place may have their own national records or data management, and other places nothing at all. So you need to take that into consideration and apply the guidance as applicable to your site.
And I think, as you mentioned, WG178 has a litany of case studies throughout it where someone could go through and reference potentially a similar case to their own to see how it was addressed in that instance.
Yeah.
Wonderful. All right, thank you for the answer. I've got another question here from Jordan. I apologize if I pronounce this incorrectly. Suavere. Can you explain how the vulnerability assessment in Tonga was conducted, and what were the outcomes in terms of adaptation planning?
Yeah, so the vulnerability of whole climate and disaster risk assessment started with a full literature review of data that is already available. Previous studies had been done before by the Asian Development Bank and the government to assess, say, particularly the disaster risk. So that was all available, and we need to reassess that, see if it's, depending on when it was done, reevaluate to the time now using the latest climate change projections. So first, all desktop study based and reapplying that. There was also, before a project, or because the project is funded by Asian Development Bank, they use a tool called Aware, which screens the risks. And so there's already sort of a filter of risks that they define in their project reference tool, or as part of I think it's called a when the project starts up, basically, that they give those filtered risks that you identify. It really, as I said, stakeholder engagement is very important. And so we could see rainfall, sea level rise, all those factors are important, and you do those studies depending on what data is available at the time. There's a national policy on climate change adaptation already available for Tonga, so that influences your project and your adaptation planning strategies and ownership in terms of responsibilities and stakeholders involved into the future. But what did I want to say now? I lost my train of thought. So in terms of stakeholder engagement, they're involved throughout the process, and so that led to also the conclusion that cyclones are their immediate most important threat to them that they see. Of course, tsunamis and earthquakes are also there. Tonga is situated very close to an earthquake trench, and that could also lead to tsunamis. But the likelihood of that is rated as lower, but the consequences, of course, higher. But cyclones could happen is sort of factor one. Does that explain?
Okay,
Nope.
I think it does. We've got questions pouring in hard and fast. We have about 7 minutes left, and about that many questions as well. So I'll jump to this question, which I think you've somewhat touched on when you've said that Tonga already had a climate change management strategy in place. But
yes,
the question reads that generally low-lying Asian regions are at risk and are also low economic regions. Were there economic challenges for Tonga in undertaking this study?
I think that's a bit broader than my scope of only climate and risk assessment. I think all low-lying islands and small developing states, as well as any other developing country in the world, not only say Pacific Islands, have all these challenges and societal challenges, political challenges, economic challenges. So that really affects a project and how we're going to adapt into the future. I think looking at other projects I've worked on in developing countries, not all countries have, say, this national policy on climate change already, or an adaptation strategy. So that really helps. That is sort of a driver for your project to influence. They want to get something done, or they want to ensure resilience by a certain date. So that really forces it forward and could bring funding in as a potential. Say Asian Development Bank has certain goals of their own in terms of resilience for on a regional or sector basis. So that's sort of where the projects would come from. And of course, in terms of this project specifically in Tonga, the climate and risk assessment is only a part of the bigger upgrading project. So of course, in terms of the design options, all the other economic issues and political or societal, that was included into the design options and choice. But I can only speak on the climate change part.
Understood. Look, I think that's a fair answer all the same. We have another question here which speaks specifically to the project that you've just gone through, which is, Ingrid, you highlighted stakeholder engagement in all 4 stages. Can you explain how are these generally being carried out, i.e. who is critical to engage and through what channel in the context of the port?
Yes, so early stakeholder engagement is of course important, and I think in today's climate we can see it's been more difficult with COVID-19. We've got a number of projects where we can't actually get to the ports, so if online workshops and so are not an option, it's difficult to engage with them, both in terms of trust to do the project and understanding. Lots of say port authorities or whoever your client is, whether it's a bank or the port terminal or a port authority, they're interested and they're aware they need to understand the climate risk better, but that's where we come in and we need to help them. But they still have difficulty in grasping, how is their port vulnerable, and how do they implement the adaptation further into the future in terms of uncertainty and long-term planning, and who takes responsibility of that implementation. So stakeholder engagement is very important to teach that to them. So you can look at workshop sessions. Training is important. Lots of times these projects include capacity building options in terms of after you identify a roadmap and you identify who's responsible, you give ownership to them. You can't just do the project and leave it there. You need to give them the tools and the accessibility, and if training is required, you can look into that and set up sort of a task group within the port as an example, to take that further.
Understood. And look, I think that maybe this answer that you've just given preempts the answer for the next question that I have. But as a follow-up on stakeholder engagement, we've received a question which reads, great presentation, thank you. In your experience, what did you find are the main challenges with regards to stakeholder engagement in these remote countries?
Yeah, so I can take experience from a varied number of projects I've worked on before, because I mostly work on projects in developing countries, and on myself, I'm from South Africa. So I think going there and meeting the port and the people, and also not only talking to the port and the clients, but also understanding, sort of living there if you're possible or able to for a while, to understand their local circumstances and other issues that affect them. Coming from, say, Europe is very different. You can't just take into account what you've learned or what you apply for a port here and just plant it somewhere else. So really, like building that bond with them and doing it together in terms of collaboration, and collaboration is often a difficulty or a challenge in terms of stakeholder engagement.
Fantastic. Look, we've got one question left in the chat at the moment, and I apologize, this may be a bit loaded because this question seems to be a little more difficult and technical, but it reads in two parts. It says the minimum and maximum IPCC AR for sea level rise varies by up to 4-fold over the next century. How will asset owners manage risk against cost with this range of projections? And part 2 follows that the WG178 case study shows a range of SLRs considered up to the year 2100 by varying up to 0.5 meters. How is this range accounted for in a cost and risk assessment?
Right, yeah. So that's where we get to climate change as a whole being quite a complex topic, and adaptation planning for the future also related to major uncertainty. We spoke before about data and data availability, and I actually didn't touch on the IPCC, but that would be the main sort of published data that you use, because you would go to authorized published data that is available, and that's IPCC. But what is important to note is, say, what's more easy to understand is, say, the global mean averages, if we look at sea level rise as an example, but you need to look at the regional context as well, and then supplement that with any local studies that was done or previous studies to enforce that. When it comes to adaptation planning, there's a whole sort of sector to look at long-term adaptation planning and under deep uncertainty. And what's important also in the working group guidance that comes through is, as you said, multiple scenarios. So you can't, or often say because of project budgets or so on, you look at the worst case scenario, because then that's fixed, you know. But with climate change and sea level rise specifically, there is so much uncertainty, as the question read. The range in levels is quite high. So at the early stages, it's better to take into account all the scenarios, or at least 2 or 3 scenarios, and develop a long-term adaptation strategy plan. And that could be a lot of work, because you need to see what your trigger values are potentially, and that is influenced by stakeholder engagement and the perceived level of risk that the client or the port needs. So don't design or build something right away to increase the key level, because we want to be resilient to whatever level of sea level rise. That level might never happen. So they need to be aware of it, and it needs to be set down on paper in some sort of adaptation strategy plan for the long term. But that's where monitoring comes into play. And as soon as a trigger value is reached, you know, okay, we need to change the adaptation pathway or go forward into something else. And their costs also need to be accounted for. So in any design options, you look at the costs and the benefit of the adaptation planning. And then, of course, costs are accounted for, and someone has the decision to make about what you go forward with in terms of costs. So I hope that answered everything.
Difficult decision to make, but I do like that you touched on the prevalence of local data. It's important to remember that the IPCC is a global projected average, and that could vary wildly region to region. And as you mentioned, I think WG 178 actually covers some of that variability by looking at site-specific examples in the case studies, which is excellent. Okay, thank you, Ingrid.
Great.
That was fascinating.
Thank you very much.
Looks like our viewers got a lot out of it. Welcome back. Good morning, good evening, wherever you're tuning in from around the world. This is the PIANC YP Professionals Committee's first ever international virtual event. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jordan Butler. I'll be your moderator for the next session, which will be presented to you by Zachary Zulkarnain. Now, Zachary is a marine consultant at Spartan Maritime, a marine risk management and research consultancy based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. With a background in geography, Zachary is working to encourage holistic and inclusive approaches to marine project management and planning, and driving sustainable development in the marine sector through the blue economy concept. His presentation is titled Marine Transport and Marine Spatial Planning, and I'll now hand over to Zachary. Thank you.
Hi everybody. Thank you, Jordan, for that really lovely introduction. I'm Zach. Yes, I work at Spartan Maritime, and this presentation really, it's something that I'm pretty excited to talk about, precisely because, I've noticed this theme within the talks here today, and you think about, sustainability and climate change, adaptation, and resilience, and this is really part of that, and it's really a reflection of the past couple of years here that Spartan Maritime has been working on. We've really taken a step back to kind of reflect on the challenges of marine project planning, and look at what's been holding us back, and how can we do things a little better. And one of the things that we've kind of realized is that actually sometimes we do things in a too reductionist approach, and a holistic one is actually needed. And that's where you come in with this idea of marine spatial planning, which a lot of you may know about, but I'll chat about in this presentation. And also, as a marine professional, what role do I have to play within this holistic planning, and how can I contribute the best? So before that, we have to get down to the basics, really, of the conceptual foundation of marine spatial planning, which is the blue economy. And this might be something that is very familiar to a lot of you. It's a broad macroeconomic concept related to the marine and coastal regions. And this is very much in parallel with the idea of the green economy that was introduced in Rio 20 Plus, and shares those same desired outcome of improved human well-being and social equity, while significantly reducing environmental risk and ecological scarcities. Notice that, of course, there's an important idea here of that social improvement, but also the ecological. And of course, this is, often intertwined with sustainable development, growth, but where are the limits to the growth? Do we want to make sure that we're growing, but we have our social objectives, our economic objectives, and our ecological objectives, and they can all be sort of achieved. But the blue economy itself, since being so new, there's competing discourses. In the literature, this is something that's often been talked about, is the many interpretations of the blue economy. The oceans mean different things to different people and will mean different things to different people in the future. So we've had a lot of chat today about island nations, for example, who are very much dependent upon their oceans and the resources it provides, and also are under threat by the oceans as well as climate change becomes much more severe in the future. We can also talk about traditional livelihoods, right? So subsistence fishing, for example, and other kind of traditional extractive industries. But what's also often talked about as well is natural capital. So just for really briefly, for those that don't know, natural capital is this idea that we can assign a certain value to nature. And it's an attempt really to integrate nature into the global economic capitalistic system. And you do that essentially by looking at ecosystem services and goods, putting a value to those things. So goods are things like resources that we extract, fish, for example, or it could be like deep sea mining and those minerals. And services can mean things like mangroves, for example, and flood mitigation, or reefs, coral reefs, and how they kind of dissipate waves, or it could be the oceans in general, and their role in kind of balancing atmospheric composition, because they do take up a lot of carbon. And there's another idea related to blue economy that I think we should be very wary about, and it's something that I do want to talk about quite a bit in this presentation, which is the oceans as frontier spaces. That means, if we think about frontier, you might think about, relating to the exploration age and colonialism, for example, where the global South and the New World were traditionally frontier spaces for new resources and new markets to create. And the oceans are possibly being seen in this way, where new resources are being found in a certain sense, especially when we talk about deep sea mining, or even the energy sector, so renewable energy, wind, wave, tidal, that sort of stuff. And there's an important feature of the blue economy, of marine economy, contemporarily today, there's increasing spatial competition because of limited space, because coastal waters are scarce and the demand for them is increasing, right? So certain water space are more valuable than others, and coastal waters, being the closest to land, are the most valuable. Now add to that, under the Sustainable Development Goal, Goal 14, water, life underwater, there's a need to establish more marine protected areas, and that's going to limit space even more. And sometimes what that can happen, and what we've seen happen in my context anyway, is possibilities of displacement. And displacement usually means, again, traditional economies like subsistence fisheries or small scale fisheries, artisanal fisheries. They're at risk of being displaced by other industries that are considered to be higher value, like the maritime industry and the energy sectors. Because of this spatial competition, there's going to be increased risk of spatial conflicts, and these conflicts need to be managed. These risks need to be managed so that we can ensure blue economy reaches its desired outcomes. I want to talk just very briefly also about policy mobility. So policy mobility in the scholarship really is about how policy transitions or transform from one scale to another. So international to national. Usually what would happen is that national policies kind of give the overarching policies. They tend to be non-specific, right? So when you go lower down the scale, they're much more specific in order to match the material conditions of a certain location, certain geographical context, political context, environmental context. Because when you have on a national scale, sort of regulations that are specific, blanket bans, blanket restrictions, they can cause some kind of suboptimal conditions which are not suited to all the areas within the nation, especially larger nations, which have a lot of variations within them. So marine spatial planning then. Marine spatial planning is something that is becoming increasingly popular, something that's being increasingly talked about. The Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission under the UNESCO uses this definition: a public process of analyzing and allocating the spatial and temporal distribution of human activities in marine areas to achieve ecological, economic, and social objectives that are usually specified through a political process. Now, take note of ecological, economic, and social objectives. That's not nudging towards sustainable development. Take note also of public process, and that means stakeholder-driven. I think Ingrid's presentation earlier today talks about climate change adaptation, and that being kind of stakeholder driven at each section. And this is exactly the same, stakeholder engagement at every part of the process of forming a management plan, a spatial management plan. But also take note of temporal distribution now, and I'll talk about that later. What a plan does and why it's so useful for us is it integrates management of the ocean through overcoming fragmentation of jurisdictions. So we think about the jurisdictions within the oceans, the governance of oceans. You have, for example, a government agency that's only to do with fisheries, another to do with navigation, another to do with energy and trade, that sort of thing. So having an integration of all these jurisdictions can actually overcome a lot of the challenges of ocean governance, because it's a lot harder to govern ocean spaces than it is to govern land. So in a sense, marine spatial planning presents a spatial tool to adapt, again, that national policy to the specific local conditions or regional conditions, depending on how big your spatial plan is, depending on your context. And it's about managing the multiple uses of ocean spaces, multiple uses of oceans through planning. And how we do this is very, very crucial, right? It can have such a major impact on how we do this marine spatial planning, and that's what I want to talk about. Okay, so marine transport then. Where does navigation and shipping kind of fit into this marine spatial planning idea? Now, back in 2014, ILA published a guide, Navigational Safety within Marine Spatial Planning, where it said that the main purpose of MSP is to achieve a balanced approach towards navigational safety, environmental protection, economic effects, and communication, in brackets, information management. Notice how this differs a little bit from the definition earlier of MSP, in that there's added here navigational safety. And that's, of course, in all marine planning, navigational safety is one of the most important things that we look out for, and we try to optimize navigational safety. But now with MSP, there's this added idea that actually we need to take into account a lot of other factors. Now look at a publication the year before from the Nautical Institute and the World Ocean Council, which says that maritime professionals need to ensure that the needs of the shipping sector are taken into full consideration, and the sector needs to understand the needs of other marine users and resources. And this is completely critical. This is such a crucial point. That is, we're not only looking at our sector, not looking only at shipping, but actually now we have to look at other sectors. It's about a negotiation process. It's bringing in more stakeholders together at an early stage to plan for the future. And so we can allocate and make those kind of optimal decisions. So to really summarize, the role of maritime administrators, professional stakeholders, is to ensure that those objectives that they have in terms of the economic objectives, the safety objectives, can be achieved within the marine spatial planning process. And one of the key inputs, the key contributions that we need to give is to define the requirements of shipping, specifically the spatial requirements of shipping, but also the temporal, and we'll talk about that later as well. So the spatial requirements of shipping are specific usually to the design vessels of a particular area, of a particular activity that's going to happen there. We're looking at the dimensions, and that in turn tells us of depth requirements related to the underkeel clearance. But also it might be, you might also want to take into account the necessary ocean meteorological or oceanographic conditions. Some shipping activities require quite benign conditions. So actually I'm going to do this activity and I really need waves to be pretty low. So I can only do it here, here, here. But also I need these kind of depths, so that narrows it down to here, 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 that sort of process. So we're defining the spatial requirements. And in order to ensure safety of navigation, but also other objectives, marine spatial planning could be planning to make sure you optimize, for example, you want to optimize fuel use, for example, reduce emissions. You might want to reduce idling times, for example. Now, forgive me as I move into dark mode for a bit. I do want to talk about the importance of data. Specifically for the shipping sector, we do a lot of marine traffic analysis, and I'm grateful to my colleagues over at Link Lab, the data scientists, to help me with this. But marine traffic data tells us the stories of human behavior in the sea. Usually, the most accessible data is AIS because a lot of ships have trackers on them, and that provides us with a lot of data. And it's a key to unlock understandings of the patterns and the spatial temporal distributions of marine vessels. And in turn, these behaviors tell us about their needs for us to kind of give an informed input for the planning process. And I just want to show you a little bit about how we do this, but essentially we're answering when using the data to answer certain questions about how they use the space, what type of activities are present, where they occur, when did they occur, and what are the characteristics of these vessels. So here we have for an eastern, on the western coast of Malaysia, in the area of Port Dickson, for example. This is some data that we've looked at for the past year. And you can see that you can filter it out and categorize marine traffic in so many ways. One of the usual ways first that we do is by vessel type. That's quite usual. So different vessels acting very differently. And you could see a pattern here. For example, the top three on the left, they do this sort of circular motion as like a U-turn. That tells us something about an obstruction in the water. That tells us something about they can't use that space in the middle for some reason. But not all of them do that. So if you look at the passenger ship, for example, some of them move right past this obstruction. It's more likely that it's a shallow depth, and we can corroborate that with the bathymetry data. So there's also variations within that vessel type, and we want to look at all these types of behaviors and then cluster them. We want to look at what types of ships do what and where, so that we can kind of classify these behaviors in order to understand what do they need, and are they doing it at an optimal in an optimal manner. Can we optimize it even more in the plan? Are they doing anything that disrupts the other objectives within the marine spatial plan, if we're talking about ecological and social? So we do this sort of behavior clustering. And so these insights can be used for planners to optimize the spatial layout, to ensure, again, safety of navigation, and of course other objectives. But there is very important point to make about this. Now, I've talked about AIS data, but what about vessels that don't have trackers on them? That don't show up in the tracking data that's always being used by the maritime professionals. Because this is important, because invisibility can mean marginalization. It's important to understand and recognize that there are limits to the data, that one source of the data might not be enough, because we see this a lot. Non-EIS typically means vessels that are smaller, of industries which are economically smaller, and sometimes maybe even illegal. But that does not mean that, they should be excluded, or we should pretend they don't exist. Planning takes more data, we need to be inclusive, and we have to give them due consideration. So how do we do that? What kind of data sources can we look at in order to make sure that we plan for these other vessels too, that we can't track, that the data is not as granular, as good for, and this is a huge challenge. Now, I spoke about temporality, and I want to give a short little case study for temporality. This is an area on the east coast of Malaysia, and I've given a map for the bathymetry of the estuary of this river, and just before that, actually, so temporal just means that there's an occupation of different spaces at different times. And so if you look at this river, there are places where larger vessels cannot navigate, not without a tidal benefit. That means that the tides need to go up a little bit in order for this for the depths to go up, and then they can navigate without risk of grounding. So that means that there's a restriction of their movement to specific times of the day, to when high tide occurs, which is, I believe, it's twice a day here. However, now in this specific case study, there was also a conflict because fishing activities also occur here, which are also tide dependent, right? High tide is the best time to cast their nets in the river in order to catch fish. It's the best time, but it's also the best time for vessels to move out of the river or come in. So you have this conflict. So there's a need to address this conflict through some sort of plan, right? You need to look at the tidal windows, when vessels can move, and what's the behavior of these fishing activities, and is there a way for both of them to kind of coexist? Because, well, there's only one river, there's only one river mouth, so there needs to be some sort of coexistence. But as I spoke before, marine or maritime activities, especially ones that carry cargo or high value items, tend to displace those which are considered lower value. And that's a reality that we really have to think about. I've only got a couple of minutes left, so when we talk about resolving spatial conflicts, I just want to talk about, for me, I think that there needs to be two things, which are, firstly, an agreement on principles of how you want to solve spatial conflicts. It could be equity and equality, transparency, holistic approach, and this means having stakeholder engagements and having that process of being open. And you need the tools to facilitate them. So one thing that we knew is a spatial multi-criteria decision analysis. I feel like I remember reading about this in Piang as well, which is essentially a suitability analysis to integrate multiple or sometimes conflicting criteria that different industries or sectors might need, different users might need. But the downside is that there's a challenge in applying those weightages to these different criteria fairly. And how do we ensure that we give due consideration to all these stakeholders? But I feel like there's participatory technologies on the horizon. I've given an example of Polis here. Polis is something that's being used by the Taiwanese government, for example, to kind of create consensus, to have their stakeholders or the people not only voters, but also agenda setters. And that's a really important thing. And we might see all these kind of machine learning based technologies to ensure participation in democratic or public processes such as marine spatial planning. So I'll end it there by saying that important things for shipping and MSP is that we need data, and that data needs to be available in order to make these well-informed decisions. And we need the tools to interrogate that data as well, but also the tool to make sure that, again, as I said before, that stakeholder engagement is not tokenistic, it's meaningful, it's fair, it's equitable. And also crucially, we need that multi-sector co-planning within the maritime sector. It's not just about our needs, our economic goals, the money that we want to make, but also about other people's lives. And of course, I feel that there needs to be an agreement, firstly, on the core guiding principles of the plan. Now, I might have some political ideas of how I want to execute certain things or how I want things to be governed. And you might have another, but I think we need to find the core guiding ones that we can all agree with. It might be sustainable development, for example. There's a consensus for sustainable development, that idea that everybody can get on board with. But it might be other things depending on the context. And that's really the kind of what we are striving to do and what we look forward to doing in the maritime sector. That's it for my presentation. Thank you so much for listening in. And sorry for if it was a little bit academic, but I hope that was interesting.
Thanks, Zach. That was fantastic. I've got to say, I work in the maritime sector day in, day out, every day of my life, and I probably haven't given that much consideration to spatial and temporal congestion myself. So I think your presentation really highlights the importance of those considerations. We're going to start off with a question that we have here, and I think that you actually maybe touched on the answer when you spoke about the Taiwanese government, but I'll let you take the lead with that. The question is very interesting. Can you give an example of national government policy that has been driven / influenced by MSP / blue economy, if any?
Yeah. So MSP is actually increasingly popular. It has been performed on some level in certain places. So in Europe, Mediterranean, in the UK, for example, they have the UK has these kind of marine planning areas So it has been applied, but increasingly blue economy close to my region anyway, Indonesia has really taken the lead on adopting the idea of blue economy, of building a sustainable economy. You know, we want growth, but we also want it to be controlled in a sense that our environment, our people, their social well-being is also kind of kept safe and being taken care of. So that's an example of a country in my region anyway, Indonesia, that has taken the blue economy, adopting this concept. But to apply marine spatial planning is a little bit more difficult. We don't have a lot of good examples of them, of how successful they are, because they're so new. But we hope to see a lot more in the future. They're usually used in, you see them in like marine protected areas, for example, that are usually like well managed in this sense, because MSP really comes from that idea of ecosystem-based management and carrying capacity of the environment. What does the environment, what can it handle really, and things like that. And we've seen kind of these spatial management plans for marine protected areas, but increasingly now we're coming into planning for economic activities now, where places of conflict, of shipping and the coral reefs, for example. So yeah, it's an ongoing process. It hasn't been adopted everywhere in the sense that we want it to, the ecosystem base, but increasingly.
Okay, thank you. It was a detailed answer. A question that we have here is, do you think that prescribing a value to nature allows for economic decisions to be made that are detrimental to the environment because they are cost effective?
Yeah. This is a very difficult question. I studied geography in Oxford, where there was, in the geography department, there was this huge big camps. One was for the commodification and valuation of nature and integrating them into the capitalist system. Another is completely against it, anti-capitalist. I'm of that camp. But I realized that this is something that's hugely popular, and there are a lot of controversies related to applying these values, and it's something that we need to realize, definitely. And I really can't answer that question because it would take me about an hour maybe, and it has to go through a lot of scholarship, but it is a very controversial question. You're definitely right.
Yeah, look, certainly agreed. And for what it's worth, I find myself in the other camp, and I think that there's a larger holistic view about short-term and long-term gain that needs to be considered in a capitalist framework. So not missing from either school of thought, I would say. We've got a question from Esteban Biondi with a couple of follow-up comments as well, which is, do you have any quality control process to evaluate marine traffic AIS data before using it? Recreational data has lots of quality problems in Southeast Asia. And he goes on to talk about in a couple of follow-up comments that he's used MSP for a project in the Red Sea, and talks about Retcom preparing a paper for that, but perhaps he can have a discussion with you in the breakout room thereafter. So the core question being about quality of data, especially in Southeast Asia.
Yeah. Esteban has identified one of our big challenges, data quality. That is completely true, especially for smaller crafts. And sometimes, even the data sources, there's a couple of different ones. So you kind of look at terrestrial, satellite, and terrestrial data is actually quite closely guarded by the government, for example. And there's a lot of issues with making sure that these vessels are included, and that's one of the big challenges that we have. Sometimes it takes on-the-ground surveys. It takes getting on a boat with a GPS and say, okay, go to your unusual route. I'm going to track you. And things like that. But there needs to be that engagement. There can't be a total dependence on one source of data completely, right? Yeah. So, but we definitely do all these quality checks. We do our exploratory data analysis. The data science guys does it. I don't, but they definitely do. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. So I have a question here that says the presented behavior clusters are very interesting. Can they be used to inform optimal dredging operations as one such example?
Yes, actually they can, especially for approach channels. You know, we talk about ports and where do the vessels, where's the best way to, you know, how to align those approach channels, those navigational channels. And we definitely use these behavioral clusters to do that. And in fact, we're doing it even now as we speak. We have all these projects to align them, and it's really, really important. The project that we have right now, you know, we're looking at ferries coming in, so we need to design the navigational channel for them. But then you have thousands and thousands of little boats that are not tracked. Again, that needs to be taken into account. Because these navigational channels, not only for the dredging, but because they're going to be used dense vessel transits, they're going to be affecting the transits of other vessels as well. So definitely we use those behavioral clusters to optimize the design of these channels for the dredging of these channels.
I think what you're talking about with small vessels there leads nicely into the next question, which is how does spatial and temporal analyses consider changes to the frequency and size of future vessels?
Yeah. Future ones are actually a little bit more challenging. It takes looking into the market a little bit, spotting trends and looking at economic plans of the government, or is there any future developments? Have they got any plans? Yeah, I mean, you do need to take those into account, especially for marine spatial planning, because we're not planning for, you know, a year or so. We're trying to plan 3, 4, 5 years, as far as we can go without it being useless in the future. It needs revision, of course, but they're expensive exercises we need to realize as well. So especially in my context, for developing countries, we do need to optimize, you know, how long can we go to marine spatial planning for how far in the future. But yeah, it is a complex one.
Absolutely. I think that is all that we have time for, but we do have even now questions that are starting to filter through. So what I'd suggest is maybe as we go to the break, Zach, you'll be joining one of the discussion rooms, will you?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. So anyone that wants to reach out and ask further questions will be able to speak to you there. Thank you once again for your presentation. Very interesting. And maybe I'll catch up with you sometime outside of this conference to pick your brain a little more on it, because you definitely got me intrigued.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody, also from my side. My name is Bianca Borka, and I will take over the last part of the presentation, of the moderation, of the second day of event. I'm working in Austria at the University of Applied Science, Upper Austria, and in the field of sustainable transport, focusing on inland navigation. Our next presentation that we will have will be done by Dr. Hyun Dong Kim, who is a civil engineer. He worked in the ocean and coastal engineering consulting industry as a senior research engineer, and he's now working as a postdoctorate researcher at the University of Florida, and is involved in PIANC as a Secretary General at the Korean National Section of the PIANC. So, Hyun, I give you the floor. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Hyun Kim, and currently a Secretary General at Piang Korea National Section. I'm very glad to make a presentation today, and it's our first YP virtual event, and I hope you're enjoying the event so far. In this presentation, I'll briefly introduce one of my research topics, applying artificial intelligence in coastal engineering, especially in sediment transport. For the contents, I will briefly start with the introduction and tell you about the study site where the observation data were collected. Then I will show you some results obtained from the hydraulic model experiment. I will then show you how I applied AI in the research and end the presentation with short conclusions. As you're all aware of, beach erosion is a global issue. Not only high wave shores, but also low wave energy shores are suffering from the erosion. When this happens, soft techniques are preferred, such as living shorelines, and among living shorelines, nourishment is one of the techniques frequently used to maintain by periodic placement of sufficient amount of sand. For sand-starved beach like Pacific Island nations, like Tuvalu, with low wave energy environment, it is best to use the locally available materials such as gravel. So for this matter, larger grain size sand is more resistant to the erosion and prolong the renourishment period, which gravel can be used simultaneously for the nourishment. Extending the renourishment period is needed for both economic and environmental purposes, and finding the best placement to slow down the erosion is important when planning for this nourishment. There are not robust numerical simulations which can be used for the gravel and sediment transport at the same time, so I have applied the AI in this research. Because world is adapting to the artificial intelligence, I thought as a coastal engineer, we could also apply AI into the coastal engineering. Of course, this research is the baby step of applying AI. However, hoping this could be the good step for the practical usage of AI in ocean and coastal area in near future. Intelligence can be defined as the ability for solving problems. So the world will be like in 30 years. We cannot compare it with how life was 30 years ago. So because technological progress is not linear. There are many gravel nourishment beaches in the world, and if I list some of the gravel nourished beach, there is a gravel nourished beach in Jinkoji Beach in Japan, Marina di Pisa in Italy, and Nice Bay in France, and Funafiti Shore in Tuvalu. And among these beautiful beach, Tuvalu has been chosen for the study site. Before talk about details of Tuvalu coast, let me explain about the country. So this Pacific Island nation is introduced as a country in danger of disappearing by the effects of global warming causing the sea level rise. Tuvalu consists of the 9 islands, and however, most of the population is focused on Fonga Fair area, as shown in the figure. It's a very small country, only around 10,000 population is living in this area. This country is a coral atoll, which has very low elevation and small land area. Fonga Fair shore has lagoon side and ocean side. However, most of the erosion and flooding problem occurs from the lagoon side. To gain more complete understanding of the underlying causes of beach erosion and site-specific morphology, after the nourishment, to quantify the nourishment performance, general topographic, UAV bathymetric survey, and wave observation have been conducted. As I said earlier, this area is a lagoon with a distance of around 17 kilometers, where it is difficult for deep sea waves to reach. We have conducted the wave observation for around 3 weeks to analyze the characteristics of the wave at the lagoon area of the Fonga Fair shore. It was confirmed that the Tuvalu shore has a low wave energy shore conditions. However, Tuvalu was suffering from the beach erosion, and this was found to be the problem of the cyclone damage, which occurs once or twice regularly every year. By comparing the wind and wave observation trend, similar trend was observed, and lagoon area where it is difficult for deep sea waves to reach, Tuvaluan coast found to be the wind-dominant shore. We also used the total station and RTK for the topographic survey, and terrain composition was created. A drone measurement was carried out outside the task area and marked on the drawings to the surrounding topographic was identified. Here I have divided into 4 different sections where erosion persists for the satellite image comparisons. So past satellite images from 1941 to 1984 were collected from the report from SOPAC, and the satellite images from Google Earth have been used as the past satellite images to compare with the present UAV survey result. So using past and present satellite images, the approximate beach area has been compared. As you can see, I divided into A, B, C, and D sections. So you cannot clearly see from here, but however, the estimated beach area has been measured using the orthocorrected satellite image. This is the sectional beach area changes, and you can see that the consistent erosion has been persisted, and after the nourishment on 2016, large amount of beach area has increased. And afterwards, around 25% of the beach area has been decreased, and this was from the impact of Cyclone Ula. Unlike other sections, it is clear that only half of amount compared to other section has been decreased in this section. And this section is the gravel nourishment section, and which the JICA has conducted. This is the gravel nourishment typical cross-section on the Fongafale shore on this section. A hydraulic motor experiment has been conducted based on this gravel nourishment. We conducted the small-scale experiment based on this field test. So geometrical scale was 1/25, was used in the experiment based on the fluid similitude using Cyclone Ula, which was the most recent cyclone impact on the tremendous damage at the Fongafale shore. The initial profile has a berm slope of 1 to 3.5 and beach slope of 1 to 11 using 2 different seawater levels. Seawater level 1 is HHWL of actual beach, and seawater level 2 is the extreme sea level condition to generate the erosive beach condition. So as you can see, sand and gravel characteristics, I used the D50 of 0.16 millimeter for the sand, and for the gravel, I used 5 millimeter. As you can see from the photo of 4 different test cases, each test case was conducted for 2 hours of duration when the Cyclone Ula condition with 2 different sea levels. So thus total 8 test cases were conducted. So as you can see, for case 1 is using only sand, and case 2 replaced the red area with the gravel, and for the case 3, case 2 is the actual condition of used in the Fongafale shore, but it can spoil the aesthetic view. So we replaced the half of amount on top with the sand and the bottom at the gravel. And for the test case 4, we changed the gravel in the sill type and cover with the left on the sand. So this is test case 1, sand berm and beach. Profile were measured for every 30 minutes. So 0 initial profile, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 90 minutes, and 120 minutes. The profile were measured along 0 to 200 centimeter. For the seawater level 1, sand dune was formed right after 30 minutes, and continuous erosion accelerated on the sand berm, and after about 90 minutes, deposited sand dune on the backshore were disappeared. For seawater level 2, trend of the foreshore erosion and berm erosion occurred after 30 minutes. So the pattern of the forming the sand dune on the backshore was similar to the seawater level 1. However, the erosion persisted and created deposited sand dune that disappeared quicker with the higher seawater level. So final profile for seawater level 1 and seawater level 2 are very similar, which means less sensitive to the seawater level. So this is the case 2, gravel barm and sand beach. So for the seawater level 1 in case 2, gravel barm and the sand beach, during 30 to 60 minutes, a gravel dune was formed on top of the barm. So this gravel dune protected minor waves from overtopping. Gravel dune was formed on the backshore, however, since the gravel did not easily move onshore, scoring occurred on the foreshore. So with time, the gravel dune migrated backshore and the size of the dune increased. Skull trench was created landward of the barm and the seaward slope, and the crest of the barm was eroded. As you can see, in the case of from the photo, left is the before the cyclone Ula, and right is the after the cyclone Ula. So one in the right shows the large amount of the gravel dune with the steep slope was formed, similarly to the experiment result. Unlike sand test cases, this test case 3, which is buried gravel layer, has the effect of slowing the erosion rate in the area behind the gravel. So this can be seen that it acts as a filter for the permeable layer of the gravel and keeps the sand inside the rare section unsaturated for a certain period of time. So the landward edge of the gravel layer was eroded after the barm erosion progressed landward, and the thin layer of gravel did some protection on the sand below the gravel layer. Similarly to the test case 3, gravel was hidden underneath the sand barm with sill shape. The same amount of the gravel was used from the test case 3. Due to the gravel sill, when the gravel was exposed, score occurred on the sand barm. The sill's effect became noticeable only after the sill's crest was exposed. But wave breaking over the exposed crest created a skull hole landward of the sill. Even in the case of the test case 3, the results confirmed that the role of the gravel filter permeable layer, shown in seawater level 1, was not exerted at the water level of seawater level 2. Before I talk about next contents of using artificial intelligence and numerical simulation, there is a problem of current models simulating the gravel and sand at the same time. This is due to the complicated mechanisms, and the reason why I choose the artificial intelligence is that the most of the gravel beach of Gravel North Beach has similar mechanism of forming the gravel dune and slowly eroded. As you can see, top is my experiment and the bottom is one of my colleagues' experiment, which used the gravel nourishment with different profile. So deposition and erosion tendency seems similar, and I thought maybe artificial intelligence can find out the complex algorithm relationship on this matter. So among many artificial intelligence models, one of the deep learning model, artificial neural network, were used in this study for the beach profile evolution and sediment transport. So all my hydraulic experiments using 4 different test cases were trained and tested using modified model. Since the current numerical simulation models cannot simultaneously reproduce the gravel and sand at the same time, artificial intelligence, which uses the neural network, was applied as a new way to cluster and classify the sediment transport. So this ANN model is a major tool in the deep learning computing and widely used in time series analysis, pattern recognition, and numerical methods. So this AI model relies on the data-driven approach where the analysis depends on the available data. The process of constructing the relationship between the input and output variable is addressed by certain general purpose learning algorithm. As you can see, activation function of node defines the output of that node given an input or set of the inputs. So 4 different activation functions were used and compared, and the most accurate ones in this research was ReLU function and was used throughout the test. 7 nodes with the input layer and 3 hidden layers with 254 nodes were used for my research. And these nodes from the hidden layer can be made up infinitely. The intention was to obtain the final predicted profile, and therefore I used the node of the output layer as setting to the 1. The reason is the aim was to predict the future profile and to compare it with the measured data obtained from the hydraulic motor experiment. And that therefore the beach profile evolution with 30 minutes, 60 minutes, and 90 minutes was used for the training, and final profile after 120 minutes was tested with the output from the prediction. So prediction accuracy comparison of using the activation function, ReLU activation function was chosen to be the best. And it is powerful and useful when the relationship between attributes or feature is more complex. However, it is difficult to describe the structure and relatively difficult to derive the optimal model since it is composed of the model close to the black box. In test case 1, using only sand nourishment with Stillwater level 1 and Stillwater level 2 were compared. And this profile is the equilibrium beach profile where the ANM model predicted the foreshore very well. However, erosion on the backshore was not accurately predicted on Stillwater level 1. For Stillwater level 2, there was a skull hole that occurred during the 60 minutes result, and the ANN used the previous training data to reproduce the score. As our current numerical models cannot reproduce test case 2, 3, 4 with gravel nourishment, only test case 1 was compared among other numerical models. So using Stillwater level 1 with the same wave conditions, it was found that the result of seashore, which equilibrium profile and linear wave theory combined with the current model, showed the most similar profile evolution as compared to that of the measured profile. And X-beach, which is nonlinear shallow water equations such as the hydrostatic pressure term and the source term for the exchange with groundwater model, created the dune on the backshore. However, a relatively good agreement was observed. On the other hand, the result of the S-beach, which is the equilibrium of mass conservation that required the mathematical expression for the cross-shore transport rate model, showed too much deposition on the foreshore. And overall, all the numerical simulation could reproduce the equilibrium beach profile with Stillwater level 1. For Stillwater level 2, when the water level is increased to almost the same as the ground level, an accurate calculations could not be performed, and the final profile of seashore showed extensive erosion on the backshore, as X-beach showed extensive erosion on both barm and foreshore, and S-beach become parallel to the ground. But here, AI result was reasonable and has chance of increasing the accuracy by enlarging the training data. So for test case 2, gravel barm and sand beach, after 120 minutes in hydraulic motor experiment, typical gravel nourishment of Tuvalu was reproduced and tested throughout test case 2. And from Stillwater level 1, the ANM model produced the dune on top of the barn, like measured profile. However, the shape and location were not in exact location. But for the tendency-wise, creating the dune on top of the barn and the foreshore erosion were accurately reproduced through using the ANM model. And measured profile of test case 2 with Stillwater level 2 showed the dune forming on the backshore, and the ANM model also predicted the berm shape profile on the backshore. The ANM model predicted less erosion on the backshore on the test case 3 compared to the measured profile evolution. Even though the overall tendency of beach profile becoming equilibrium was predicted, the amount of the erosion was not accurately predicted. But the prediction of ANN on the test case 3 with Stillwater level 2 was accurate as compared to the measured data. But erosion was accurately predicted on both the barm and the foreshore. Finally, for the test case 4 with seawater level 1, similarly to the test case 2 with seawater level 2, the skull hole was predicted on the barn and less erosion was predicted on the backshore of the beach. For sure prediction of cross shore 60 to 180 centimeter prediction was accurate. Gravel sill did not move so much on the cross shore 40 to 64 centimeter in the measured data. However, the tendency of ANN prediction on this section predicted well. The prediction had a dune shape formed on this section, and the cross shore of 0 to 40 centimeter had a reasonable prediction as compared to the measured data. So for the conclusion, nourishment using multi-grain sized sediment to lessen the renourishment period and save the sediment for sand-starved beach like Tonga, Tuvalu. And throughout the hydraulic motor experiment, buried gravel layer found to be an efficient method in slowing down the erosion, and the gravel layer act as a water permeable filter. The numerical simulation model to reproduce multi-grain nourishment is difficult since the mechanism is very complicated. Therefore, deep learning AI model was applied in the research and reproduced the phenomena and prediction of the modified ANN model about the erosion trend, and the pattern were reasonable. However, due to the lack of data sets, large amount of the data should be used for training for better prediction. It is difficult to describe the structure and relatively difficult to derive the optimal model since it is composed of the model which is close to the black box. However, nowadays, many researchers are in progress to come up with the explainable artificial intelligence. Therefore, my next move is to come up with the explainable AI so I can practically apply this model in coastal engineering. Thank you for listening to my presentation. And if you have any questions or if you want to do the collaborative research with me, you can always feel free to email me at kim.h@ufl.edu. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Hyun, for this really impressive presentation about your project. Now let's have a look what the audience asks. First message and answer. Excellent topic. Kim, I have a question from a more long-term management perspective of the coast, considering the steep slope of the gravel beach you showed. How feasible and sustainable do you think gravel nourishment is? Do you think it can be applied as a coastal protection strategy?
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
Sorry. Yes. So the question was, how feasible and sustainable do you think gravel nourishment is? Do you think that it can be applied as a coastal protection strategy?
Okay, so you're asking about the gravel nourishment. It depends. Gravel nourishment, as I showed earlier, it's very great method, living shoreline and soft technique. However, some low wave energy shores like Fonga Fair area, it is best method. But as I said earlier, it can spoil the aesthetic view. So you can substitute the gravel with the filter fiber. There's something called a filter unit, but you can substitute with those. But if that area is in danger of coastal erosion, I think you can definitely use the gravel nourishment as a countermeasure for erosion.
Okay, thank you. Another question. Very interesting to see AI was used. What is the next step in the application of AI in predicting the transport in your research?
So I'm as a coastal engineer, I'm applying this AI into many different research I am conducting right now. So for example, one is that I'm using this AI so-called model is called a YOLO, and I'm using this method to find out classifying the sub-bottom profile. So before using the AI, we have to do it by hand to find out the classification of the sub-bottom. There's like 21 classifications, and we have to do it like all by our hands in Korea, but after applying this AI, we could do it. We could find the pattern. We use the YOLO to find the pattern recognition and do it automatically. Yeah.
So AI really eased your lives.
Yeah, it's like every day our lives, like we're using navigation for cars, and in fact, like the navigation uses AI. Like we don't know whether we are using AI, but it's very useful method, I think.
So the third question, is this AI model can be applied to another coastal site?
Yes. Yes, but no. So we only have used a small amount of the training data for my research. So we can apply to different sites, but before ahead, we need more data. So there's a word saying that no data means no deep learning. So therefore, I mentioned that a lot of work needs to be done before we can practically use in actual sites. There are like many researchers out there working on it, and I'm also working on it as well.
Okay. So the next one, Hyun, is this type of research, IA at coastal studies, taking place in other places in the world, or are you one of the first to apply it?
I'm pretty sure many researchers are working on the AI, but when I wrote the thesis regarding, so when I get the PhD, this was my similar work was my dissertation, used in the dissertation, and I couldn't find many references using the AI for the sediment transport. So as I said earlier, it's a baby step because not many people actually have used AI to do the sediment transport. So it's I guess this AI application is our homework for our future.
Okay. And for the AI model itself, why did you use the artificial neural network?
Okay. So it depends on research objectives. So for my the other researches, as I said in previous questions, I have used CNN, LSTM, YOLO, and more. But for this sediment transportation, sediment transport, ANN is the basic model for the deep learning, like which use the neural network and have applied to see the results, since it uses in many cases for the time series graph and algorithm findings for like complex algorithm findings.
Okay. Then I think the last question, could you compare the results from the numerical simulation to artificial intelligence? How did you do so? How did you manage to do so? Sorry.
Okay, there is not a robust numerical model to simulate the gravel and the sand at the same time. Well, there's XBeach Gravel. XBeach, they developed the gravel and sand simultaneously, but it's not robust model, I think. And thus, I have only compared when using only sand, which is the test case 1. For the other test cases, it is not possible to compare with the numerical simulation, so I have compared with the experimental results.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, welcome back to for our last presentation of today's event. I hope you enjoyed the last networking session of the day. Our next and last speaker is Dr. Lisa Maria Putzegger. She's research professor at the University of Applied Science Upper Austria in the field of sustainable transport. She's expert in the navigation and employed in a number of national and international projects. Furthermore, she's co-chair for the YPs in the European African region. Please, Lisa, go on with your presentation.
So now you can hear me. Thank you. It's good if the colleague who is going to introduce you is sitting next to you in the other office. So hello from my side. Many thanks to Bianca for the introduction, and as well to the organizers for organizing this great event. So I think we can already start to share the screens. Yes. Thank you. Perfect. So I'm very happy that I can tell you something in this last content presentation of this huge event about sustainability, and in particular about also the different transport modes and some newest developments in Europe, which are interesting for, I think, the whole world, because they will result in a worldwide standardization for CO2 emissions. So I also got some input from Alan Lewis. So Alan Lewis, he's the leader of the project for the new CO2 emission guideline, this ISO 40083, which sounds very technical, but is the standard for the emission. So I should click hide. So now you can see the full screen. Thank you. Yeah, so in that sense, I will start to talk a little bit about why sustainability is very important. And yeah, actually, this graph will show you how the temperatures evolved in the last 100 years, 120 years, let's say. You can see that 100 years ago, it was nearly not at all that the annual average temperature was higher than 0 degree. And what we can see is that in the last 30 years, the temperature rise really accelerated. So what we can see here on the circle are the different countries, the different worldwide countries and the different regions. So let's say what's important here to mention is that this 2-degree border results in some different effects. And we are very often talking here, especially in Europe, about that we have to limit the global warming up to a maximum of 1.5 degrees, and that 2 degrees is already too much because it has too severe effects on the different species, on the different extreme weather conditions. So for example, if we take a look at the different species, we say if we have a global warming of 1.5 degree, then we have around a loss of 6% of all the insects worldwide. When we speak about 2 degree global warming, we see that we have a loss of 18% of all the insects. So what we can see is that in this case, for example, it's more than the double of the effect. So it's not a linear connection. It's more a very, very impressive and very high increase of the different effects of the global warming. So another example is, for example, for us, talking about logistics and transportation today, is, for example, the sea level rise. What we can see, or Arctic sea ice, what we can see is that in a 1.5 degree scenario, we have an Arctic, so an Arctic without ice every 100 years. And what we can see is that we have ice-free summers with a 2 degree global warming every 10 years. So we can see this really exponential connection between this global warming and this just 0.5 degree. And on the right side, you have this world carbon clock. So that's the CO2 budget, some scientific calculations trying to show how important it is that we act now, that we do not wait until 5 years or 10 years, that today it's the day where we have to start. So on the right picture, you can see the 2 degree scenario, which shows we have around 25 years and 6 months, 11 days left until we have overreached our CO2 budget. And in case for the 1.5 degree scenario, we can see that we only have less than 8 years until we have finished the whole budget for the CO2 emissions. So let's say that's really showing us and underlying us that we have to act now and try to do our best. And I think all of you in your different fields, in your different areas, in your countries have already experienced the global warming, and that we are, as young professionals, definitely having the position to change something in future, and also to do everything that we make the best with our knowledge. Doesn't matter if it's coming from environmental sciences or technique from an engineering perspective or whatever, to make sure that we make our contribution and bring everything up to a very sustainable level. So actually what you can see on this slide is the different CO2 developments in the various sectors. So on the right graph, you can see that we managed in the last 30 years to reach a decrease of the CO2 emissions in all sectors: power industry, industrial combustion, buildings, other sectors. But we did not manage to reach it in the transport sector. You can see it also on the left, in the left slide, that all the other sectors managed to go down to decarbonize the sectors. But in the transport sector, we have this huge potential. And here I really would like to mention that when we speak about the transportation sector, it does not only include freight transport, not at all. It also includes our individual transport. And by the way, it's making more or less the half of all the transport emissions are produced by our individual transportation behavior, mainly by the cars. So actually, that's something which is really, really important, and which I really would like to emphasize at this moment, that is very important also for us to see if we can change our individual transport behavior. But that's another topic. Today I would like to speak about freight transportation. So what we can see here is that focusing on logistics emissions and transport emissions, we expect that we will have an increase by 2050 of 50% instead of a reduction by 90%. In Europe, we have this goal that we should achieve a reduction of 90% of all the emissions in transportation by 2050. But actually, as you can see, that's really one of the pessimistic forecasts, that we only have an increase by almost 50% by 2050. And for sure, there's also this issue, maybe thinking about our individual behavior when we buy goods. Do we really need this parcel today or tomorrow? Do we really need this thing at all? So also thinking about coming back to this individual behavior. Yeah, what we can see on this picture is very interesting. That currently we are having like 3 billion tons of cargo produced by the CO2 emissions produced by the transportation sector. And what we can see is that 62% are produced by the road transport, around 1/3 by sea, and the rest air, rail, and inland waterways. This is only focusing on the freight transportation. That's important to mention, not on our individual transportation. So what we can see is that we have a really big challenge here in the transportation sector, and a big potential also to change something and to give our contribution for the future. So in Europe, for example, we have this special strategy, let's say. It's called the European Green Deal, which was launched already only 2 years ago by the European Commission. So the European Commission is the representative, includes the representatives of all the European countries which are part of the European Commission. And what is important is that we say that the European Commission says we as Europeans, we would like to be the first climate neutral continent. that's why we have these very optimistic goals, and also that's why we have these very straight strategies and funding programs to make sure that we achieve in the transportation sector this 90% reduction. So please take a moment, sit back and maybe think, okay, from today to tomorrow, we should try to reduce all our emissions by 90% of transportation. So as you may know, it's only less than 40 years which are left. So it's a big challenge which we face here in the transport sector. And I'm pretty sure that many people of you are working in the maritime sector, for example, where you have very huge ships which maybe cannot or can currently not be run very environmental friendly or zero emission, let's say, because they have to have strong engines and to make sure to have a strong power to shift so many containers, 20,000 or whatever. So that's just important to mention here. Yeah. So this European strategy, we have these 5 pillars, and I think that what's very important is that, and what we are going to talk about today is these prices that reflect the impact on the environment. So what does this mean? This means that we have prices which ensure that they are really showing the real cost of the different transport modes. For example, we know that the transport emissions by road are higher than those by inland waterways. But this is not reflected in the transport price. That's why in Europe they are starting to increase the taxes for CO2 emissions, and to really have this truth of the prices of the different transport modes. And that's also the topic of today. So when we speak about the different transport modes, and I'm pretty sure that this slide is highly interesting for some of you, I hope so, let's say. What we can see here is that we have now, last year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we said, okay, we have a fixed value per transport mode, which we say that these are the CO2, the grams of CO2 emissions per transported ton per transport mode. But now we say we have more range. So we have different ranges. For example, what you can see is in road and air, the range is quite high, but actually the real values are more on the right side. Yeah, it's just in case that everything is perfect. So you have a very environment-friendly propulsion systems or something, and a very high load of goods, then you are in the left part. But in general, what we can say is air is the most harmful, followed by road. And then we have inland waterways, the maritime transport and the rail transport, more or less on the same level. So that means, coming back to this European strategy, the European strategy really focuses on shifting goods to those transport modes from the road. What we have seen, for example, based on the pandemic in the last 2 years, is that the passenger transport the airplanes, they really decreased a lot. Because the passengers, I think most of us were traveling a lot before, and now we are not traveling at all, or nearly not traveling at all. So the passenger transport really declined. But what we can see is that many goods were transported by air now, which is resulting in a very bad CO2 balance. And we expected to have a worldwide CO2 reduction of the total emissions. But what we can see is that this reduction is really minimal. So even if we thought that this pandemic, where everything was standing still for 2 months, it just had a very little impact on the whole worldwide CO2 production. That's also very important to mention. So what we can see here, those are the reference values of the GLAC framework. The GLAC framework is the Global Logistics Emission Council, which is trying to standardize values for worldwide CO2 emission calculation. So what we can say is that we are facing this challenge that we have now to reduce our CO2 emissions, but on the other hand, we have to make sure that we use the same system of measurement, because when we say in Europe we measure CO2 emissions different than in US, or even worse, in Austria, where I come from, we measure CO2 emissions different than in Germany. Where's the standardization? So that's why this Global Logistics Emission Council came up, to make sure that we have standardized values for the whole world, and which will result in this ISO certification. Coming to this certification, so I hope I can explain it to you very simply, is that this will be published next year. So in 2022, you can see the results of this very big working groups coming up with this certification, to make sure that we have this ISO guideline for the whole industry, for the whole world, that everyone is referring to the same values, so we can compare everything, so we can show how are we going to proceed. And moreover, it's very important that we increase our research to make sure that we have the fitting values, that we have the exact values, so we can calculate these emissions. And if you have some questions about this ISO guideline, Alan Lewis, we are working together in the IWNet project. You can just let me know or send him a mail. He's very open to questions and very good in answering and describing everything, what's going on. So what will this project deliver? What I already said is it's about this quantification and reporting of these greenhouse gas emissions, which arise from the transport sector. So you can be certified then based on this ISO guideline, which is very important for the companies, because in Europe, for example, we head towards these directions that each company has to report the CO2 emissions as they report their revenues, for example. So there are lots of experts worldwide working on this standardized guideline and to have these exact values for the different transport mode. For example, you can say then I have a track proposed by diesel from this year, going from Munich to Vienna, and how many CO2 emissions is it producing. A new trend which is coming here is that we don't use these standardized values as suggested by the GLAC framework, but more we include really these primary data of the different companies. So that's an outlook. Important to know that we have this trend here in Europe, and I think it's maybe coming also in other countries, or already established in many other countries worldwide or regions. So what does it mean to use primary data? This means that we use the exact data where we know, okay, we have this fuel consumption for this truck, for example. So many companies are already supporting the industry in calculating this primary data, because that's, as you can imagine, this is not an easy task at all. There are so many question marks, there are so many open questions, and there are so many hard things how to calculate this, or what is a valuable value for greenhouse gases of this ship, for example. So there are many question marks which we are trying to answer in various research projects, and that's definitely a trend in the European Union for the next 30 years, at least 40 years until at least. So what can we say is that, for example, for inland waterways, we have the challenge that there are not so many ships. So what we have here to make sure is that we have this big amount of data available for all the different ship types, that we have really that we have values which we can rely on. So let's say the inland waterway transport sector, there are not so many inland waterways, there are not so many ships compared to road, for example. There are much more trucks than ships. So it's much easier to collect data, to have valuable data for the road. But it's very important to make sure that the other transport modes stay comparable compared to the road sector, which is already quite far in emissions calculation, let's say, because also the lobby is trying to do a lot in calculating and collecting this data. So there's my summary now. I think I will make it in time. I did not get something. Yeah, 5 minutes left. No, 2 minutes left. So what are the key messages of my presentation? And what would be great if you would remember is there is this global initiative. So we have this ISO certification based on the GLAC framework, where experts from around the world are working together, trying to get the standardized value for the freight transport. And it's not self-explaining at all. So especially, but also not only smaller companies, but also large companies need some expert and also in-house expertise about this emission calculation. And what we see is that in particular young professionals or also older professionals which have this expertise or which are interested in this topic are really frequently, so the companies look for them. There are many job vacancies for that. Yeah. And then this third pillar is this primary data. So the trend goes that we don't use this standardized value, like to say this usually based on the GLAC framework, a truck with this and that specification has 3 grams CO2 per ton, per transported ton, but we go to this primary data. So to make sure that the logistics providers themselves share the actual values of the fuel consumption and so on. Yeah. Then the challenge is definitely that we have to make sure to integrate all the transport modes and to improve the data pool of all for example, the inland waterway or also railway transport, which are not so frequently used as the road transport, because there we have a much bigger potential of collecting data, and data that's the most important thing. So we can show that this is reliable data which we can rely on. Yeah. And definitely, so coming back to this inland navigation, it's definitely the biggest challenge to make sure that we collect enough data in this sector and to be able to compare also with the other transport modes. So I think that's it, and I think I made it on time. I hope I could give you some interesting inputs, and yeah, I'm looking forward for your questions.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa Maria, for these great presentations. We indeed received some questions for you. So I'd like to start with the Q&A session. First of all, the first message was excellent presentations. Do you know ways in which Piang is addressing the transport emissions issue? Are there initiatives in which we can take part, and how?
Mm-hmm. Actually, that's a very good question. I'm involved in the container working group 237, if I remember the number correctly. But I'm pretty sure that some of the Piang members are maybe involved in GLAC. But actually, I don't know any names. So I think this would be a very good issue that we combine the GLAC initiative. So it's still possible to work with Ellen, who is the coordinator of this ISO guideline. So I think it would definitely make sense to do a connex here. A very good idea.
Then the second two questions fit together, so I will read both of them. Is the ISO 14083 document or guideline available online for free? And or where can a company find information about this GLEC framework or the ISO guideline?
Actually, so the ISO guideline is not finished yet, but will be published by the end of next year. So there's this draft that people are working on, but there every few months are some meetings where you can join in and see the correct status of the ISO guideline. And the GLEC framework you can download. It's a very huge report of, I think, 200 pages, where everything, all the different ship types, cargo types, etc., are described. And this is available for free if you just Google the GLEC on the GLEC website. I can put in the links in the presentation, or I don't know if there's any other option to share it with the audience. I don't know, maybe Bianca, do you know?
We can write it in the chat, maybe.
Okay, so I will Google it now and then send it to you, and you can put it in the chat. So I will share everything. You can find the documents directly.
Okay. Then, thanks, Lisa Maria. Is the ISO guideline considering views from all over the world, including the developing countries, or is it applicable to Europe only?
So actually, it should be the standard for the global emissions. And I think which is important here, let's say, for sure there are some regional differences, which result in different consumptions of, for example, fuel or so on. But this should be considered in the platform. And I think that people and experts covering the whole world are involved. And let's say a truck driving in Europe, if it's the same type like driving in another country, they are the same CO2 emissions. And as I'm aware, there are many different, also all the types of trucks, for example, where you get the values out of the document. So I hope that they also have this data. And if you don't have it and you need it, just write Ellen what you would need, because they can include it in the working groups, and we can include it in our research project for the future to make sure that we have this data which you will need for the calculation.
Okay, thank you very much. Then, do you believe we can achieve the ambitious goals of reducing the emissions by 90% in 2050? What will be the most important challenge to overcome?
For sure, I believe. So I'm researcher in this area. Let's say I'm very optimistic that we will achieve it, and then we have to achieve it. And I think the biggest challenge in if we can achieve it or will fail is that we have to shift our mindset. So we have to make sure that we reflect our personal individual behavior, but we also have to make sure that we think out of the box. So for example, if we only think, yeah, we have always done this transportation with the road and never considered another transport mode, that we will never have this chance to shift to rail or inland waterways or whatever. So this out of the box thinking, it's very important. And the third thing is this trust with each other. What we see very often here in research is that the companies are not willing to share data at all. But we need it. We need the data so we can do something, we can calculate, we can bundle transportation. So I think the biggest issue in achieving this goal is by, how to say, this mental shift or our individual thinking, yeah.
Thank you. So I think two more questions are there. So great presentations. In your experience, do you think the private sector has an important role to play here? How should they work together with governments, etc.?
So the private sector, I assume you mean the companies, the industry. So I definitely think they play an important role, since the private sector is producing the also lots of CO2 emissions, let's say. And I think that, let's say, there was a lot of change. I have been researching in this topic for nearly 10 years now, and what I can say is that in the last 2 years, really lots of the views of the companies changed. So they are now, when we speak about companies, it's not like a box, it's people. Yeah. So and the people are now getting more into this topic and want to make their companies green and really accelerate this process. So what I can see is that definitely they have a big role, and also the government has a big role, for example, with CO2 taxations or so on.
Okay, thank you very much. Then a short last question, which is very interesting, I think. Will ISO 14083 have also quick calculator like AN 16258 now on Eco-Transit World?
So Eco-Transit is based on the GLAC framework. So, and since the ISO guideline is based on the GLAC framework, or let's say that's the GLAC framework with more values. So in an updated version, it's the ISO guideline, and definitely the Eco-Transit. I assume that they will also be updated then with these more enhanced values and so on. So they're working very closely together.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we have 3 minutes left, but as there are no questions left, I think we end the Q&A session. Thank you very much, Lisa Maria, for your presentation and your time.
Thank you very much. Also for the many questions. I hope that I could give you a little insight in the newest developments in Europe.
Bye. So we are almost at the end of our second event day. Now I want to thank you in the behalf of the organizing committee. I want to say a big thank you to all the interested audience, but also to all the speakers who took time for preparation and for being here, and who make this event so successful. I now want to pass to Francisco Esteban for the closing words. Thank you once again, and I wish you a nice afternoon, night, evening, or morning, wherever you are in the world. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you very much, Bianca. Well, I think that after this long day, there's not too much to say except my deep appreciation, my great appreciation to the Young Professionals Commission that has succeeded in arranging an international virtual event, a global event with presentation from all continents. So thanks to the chair of YPCOM, Leslie Froelich, to the organizing committee, Sebastian Iglesias, also deputy chair of YPCOM, Bianca Borca, Heather Houston, Rocio Lopez, and Jack Lee. Congratulations to all the moderators, because they have kept the time perfectly and have handled the questions very well. Congratulations also to the presenters, because the depth of the technical presentations has been really, really important. I think it is very clear from this technical level that the young professionals are Piang, are not a part of Piang, are really the present of Piang. I think that YPCOM couldn't provide a better response to the challenge put by the executive committee regarding the preparation of a webinar. The idea of having 2 days, so to fit to the two main time zones in which they could arrange for having the most potential attention, I think has been a great success. Also, the organization has allowed for questions and answers that have brought very fruitful discussions, and the room for networking that I think that even not used at the level it should have been. Not many people were networking, but I presume that in future events we will get more used to this. I think this is an excellent event, but I wish that we can recover as soon as possible the physical meetings, the physical networking. These kind of events will stay with us, I'm sure, because they have, we cannot discuss that they have a lot of advantages and allow to be together people from many continents at the same time, and really avoiding travel costs. And we are aware that the young professionals sometimes have difficulties to arrange travels too far away. The topics that have been addressed can define very well which are our present challenges. Port governance in Brazil, port planning, both in Argentina in general planning and planning for adaptation, technical solutions as geosynthetics and also blocks for breakwaters, sustainability, climate change, adaptation, resilience, transport, emissions, digital technologies. I think the selection of topics, it is something that has been done very, very well. Thanks to the presenters also for having been able to keep the times of the presentation as scheduled. Even now we are a little bit ahead of schedule. I cannot add too much because I think everything is said, and we have had today a very long morning in Europe, and afternoon and evening in Asia, and even night because I presume that some colleagues from the Americas are also connected. I have seen some of them at the networking area. So congratulations again to the young professionals, my appreciation to all attendants, and also I encourage them to join Piang, to be part of the Piang family, to have access to all the benefits of membership, and to start preparing Piang activities in their countries and in the regional areas. So thanks a lot, and then I can say that this International Virtual Event 2021 of the Young Professional Commission has arrived to the closure moment. Thanks a lot.